of the EA bus service, but I didn't see there was a plan to tackle those costs. So I would propose on that item that we do write back and ask them to detail specifically what they are doing to address the huge over-reliance on taxi provision for SEND children. There will always be children for whom a taxi is the appropriate means of transport, and if that is the case, then absolutely they should be provided with that. But again, as so many aspects of our SEND system, this feels to me like a crisis management response rather than a planned response. So I propose we write back on that basis. Is there anything else in that correspondence any other members want to raise? Because they were issues that had been highlighted by individual members on the committee. No, nothing. That's grand. So in terms of other matters arising, if I could just refer to your notes there, Mark, on that one for that, in terms of the piece of correspondence. So yes, there is another piece of correspondence that has come through that I'm going to suggest that we just take now, and that is in your table papers, and it's an embargoed piece of correspondence from the Minister, and if I could just propose we go into closed session now, and we'll have a look at that.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
And we'll try and get through all this quickly so that we can get on to the evidence sessions. Okay, so that's us back in public session, and if you're able to bring anyone back into the gallery. So item 5 is the draft minutes of the committee meeting of the 12th of June. That's at page 57 of your packs. So I would propose those are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thanks. Okay, so that moves us on to item 6 on the agenda, and that is further briefing from the Independent Review of Education panel. And I would refer members to the briefing paper from the clerk at page 17, the Investing in the Future report, pages 65 to 569, and the Hansard of the briefing from the panel that we received on the 29th of May, that's page 606. There's also items of correspondence, item 9.12, which did refer to the independent review, although I would suggest we take that in correspondence if members are content with that. So if we can bring through the witnesses through, and I'm assuming that we do have Dr. Bloomer and Isabel Nisbet attending via Zoom, so if we could also arrange to bring them through. So I'll just let the in-person witnesses get settled, and then we will go from there. Hello, Keir and Isabel, can you both hear us okay?
I can, thank you very much.
That's great, and Keir? Brilliant. Okay, so we will let the panel get settled, and while they're doing that, I've just, again, should now be familiar to anybody observing the committee, but I'd like to welcome Sir Jerry Loughran, Vice Chair of the Independent Review Panel, in person here. Also in person we have Marie Lindsay, member of the panel for the Independent Review, Robin McLaughlin, panel member for the Independent Review, and then joining us remotely we have Dr. Keir Bloomer, the chairperson of the review panel, and Isabel Nisbet, also panel member of the Independent Review panel. You're all very welcome. If there are any issues with any audio, or if you're struggling to get in, I think maybe I missed some indications from the two panellists joining us on Zoom last week. Please do just shout if we're not seeing any indications there. So if we are ready to proceed, then much as we have had in the previous evidence sessions, very much open floor for you at this stage. Would invite you to make a presentation of up to 10 minutes. And we had specifically asked for a focus on the themes of transitions within the education system and that wider issue of area planning, so that more structural aspect of your recommendations. And then we'll move to questions from members. We are maybe a little tighter for time in terms of where we thought we'd have got to in the agenda by this stage, so I'm going to suggest that questions and answers from members are on 5 minutes. If we can try and get to questions quickly and make sure that answers are succinct and get into the nub of the issues, that would be really helpful, so we can cover. I assume there'll be a wide range of issues that everyone will want to raise. So it's over to you for any opening remarks, and we will go from there.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we in discussing this among ourselves, we felt that some of the things that we said at the last meeting about funding and the funding problem did strike a chord with the committee, and we sort of felt that maybe we might use this meeting today to try to build a bit more on what we see as being the resource challenges, which are tremendous in scope. So if that's okay with the committee, from time to time we will deliberately sort of pick on a particular funding problem in any particular area that we're talking about, including, for example, the areas that you mentioned, Chair.
We're very much in your hands, so if budget is a key focus, please do continue to focus on that.
Could I suggest that we make a start on that by talking about special education? We had a very good conversation with you at the previous 2 meetings on special education, but one thing that we felt we hadn't done was maybe bring out the resource issues to the extent that we felt they should have been brought out. And would it be okay then if I asked Keir to say something about the resource issues in special education?
Absolutely. Over to you, Dr. Bloomer.
Thank you, Chair. I shan't take long because we did cover this before, but as Jerry says, I think it's essential to emphasise it. When we talked about special needs issues quite extensively on the first occasion when we met with you, the questions that came from members, and there were quite a lot of them, were all concerned with improving the service to young people. Now, that is very understandable, and of course, one of the aspects that we stress in our report is that at the present moment, the service provided to young people is in many important respects very unsatisfactory. But I think it is important to emphasise the other key point that we make in our report, which is that costs are out of control and are escalating extremely rapidly. In 2017-18, expenditure on young people with special educational needs totaled £255 million. By 2022-23, that amount had increased to £479 million. In other words, not far short of double. When we projected expenditure forward, we thought that it was possible that it would reach over £900 million by 2027-28. That's only 3 years away. And what the point that we want to make, and we know that this is not the kind of point which is popular, it's got absolutely no emotional appeal compared with trying to provide a better service for young people who need it, is that at that kind of level, expenditure on special educational needs will be doing huge damage to the provision for all other young people. Because there is little chance, I would have thought, that the executive will simply add on to the education budget year on year the amount that is necessary to meet the escalating costs of special educational needs. So by that time, 3 years hence, a third of the budget will be spent on a relatively small proportion of young people, and the damage to the system as a whole will be very considerable. So what we want to say, and we take no pleasure in this, but I think it's absolutely essential to stress it, that this expenditure has got to be brought within control, or else the damage to the system will be inestimable.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bloomer. Do any of the other panel members have anything they wish to add at this stage in relation, I suppose, in relation to the SEN issue and SEN budgets in particular?
I think it just points to the urgent need for the transformation of SEN, because even with it taking up the huge swathe of the budget that Dr. Bloomer has outlined, clearly the service itself is not fit for purpose. So I think we have to really address this as a matter of urgency.
Thank you. And I suppose if I could just begin in terms of any opening remarks, I would just want to emphasise that this committee has prioritised SEN, and I think you are right to pick up in terms of the focus of our questioning. It has always been through the lens of delivering outcomes for children with special educational needs, and I think we've been very clear as a committee that our number one priority is to, what I think in your report you used the phrase that the end users of the system. So it's not really about trying to ensure that we keep a system running, it's ensuring that those who actually are the users, the ones who access that system at the end, are having their needs met. And I think we would emphasise that from a rights of the child perspective as well. So I want to be very clear on this, because I think we need to be aware that there will be parents of children with special educational needs watching this committee. They do watch this committee. They watch it religiously in many cases, because they are so concerned about the impact of a broken system on their children's outcomes. So I would want to be very clear, we do not want to lose sight on this, and I think we do not want to purely talk about SEN in terms of pounds and pence. I think that is very clear, and I'm certain that there is unanimous agreement around this table on that point. However, the spend is rising exponentially, and I suppose for me the concern is that we are pumping money into a system that's broken. Often, as we see in the health system, there is a sense that you could effectively pay the whole executive budget into the health system, but in its current state it's not delivering the outcomes for people, and I worry that we are perhaps reaching that point in relation to SEN services. So I suppose for me the question is, if we are pumping money into a system that's broken and does not deliver for children, and that's not sustainable, can you as a panel summarise your recommendations in terms of what the process of transformation might look like, so that we can arrive at a system that is fit for purpose, so that when the investment goes in, it actually delivers? I'll hand over to whoever wants to take that.
Well, there are two aspects of it. One of them is what we provide in terms of resource, other than human resource. I mean, one of the features of special education need now is the extent to which people with very significant SEN requirements cannot be provided for within the special school system. There are waiting lists for people to get into the schools. Now, the Minister has said that he wants to build more special schools. We reckon, I think if you look at our report, you'll see that we estimate the additional capital requirement to be in the region of 400 million. That takes into account new schools, but it also takes into account modernising some of the existing schools so that they've got state-of-the-art facilities, and it also means creating, as the Minister is currently intending to do, creating special education units within the mainstream school system. So you're talking about very significant capital requirements, which is sometimes overlooked when we're talking about the SEN resource. We tend to focus on the recurrent costs, but the capital requirements are very significant as well. In terms of what we could do to improve outcomes, I mean, the Audit Office have pointed out that it's not possible to measure outcomes because the information simply isn't there to allow us to determine whether or not what we're doing. I'm talking now about mainstream education, to be clear about that there. I'm not talking about outcomes in special schools, but in mainstream education, outcomes are not really, it's not really possible to measure them. And that is a weakness, because it means that we are not certain that the way we're spending the money can be fully justified in terms of good outcomes. So one of our main recommendations, as you know, is that there should be a significant increase in the number of trained SEN teachers in the mainstream system. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. It's a long, drawn-out process. But as we've said on other occasions, I mean, this report envisages where we want to be in 10 years' time. So if we want to be delivering the best possible special education outcomes within 10 years, then you've got to start the journey now. And starting to train more special education needs teachers now is feasible. And gradually build that up over a period of time. Even if we wanted to, we couldn't suddenly start producing hundreds of additional special education needs teachers each year. It's just not practicable. But
no, Dr. Bloomer was looking to come in. Could I just ask a quick question, Jerry, just on the back of that? When you refer to special educational needs teachers, are you envisaging a specific qualification? That is, you would leave university as a qualified special educational needs teacher, qualified to specialise in that area, or are you advocating for more provision to equip all teachers coming out of teacher training colleges to be able to be equipped to deliver that specialist provision?
Both, I would say.
Both.
It's very much both, Chair, is required. And I've the other parts, but you might want to bring in Keir first.
If Keir wants to come in. Oh, you're on mute there, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's perfect, thank you.
Good, thank you. You put the problem very well yourself, Chair, when you said that we were pumping money into a broken system. I think that's exactly the problem. So we've got to try and repair the system or initiate new procedures altogether. I would direct members' attention and suggest strongly that you have a look at these paragraphs later on after the meeting is over to Volume 1, paragraph 325, which lay out the principles we think should apply. 328, which details the ways in which statements are written have to be altered, and most importantly, 332, which summarises our overall approach. And briefly to describe 332, first point we make there is about the importance of early diagnosis and early intervention, because these are the most effective ways and also the most cost-effective ways of dealing with issues of special educational needs. Secondly, we talk about giving primary schools and early years settings better access to expert knowledge in this area, because that's an essential component, obviously, in early intervention. Thirdly, about better equipping the teaching force itself to deal with these issues, both as you've just been talking about with Jerry, through initial teacher education, where there's a need for more stress on SEN, and through subsequent training. Fourth, and very important, making sure that stages 1 and 2 of the special educational needs process are effective, because the key problem at the present moment is that parents believe that they will not get an effective service for their children until they've got to stage 3, that is, getting a statement. And the experience of the system demonstrates that they are in fact right on that. So probably the most important single thing we have to do is make sure that stages 1 and 2 are working more effectively, and that's about the expertise which schools themselves have and their ease of access to other expertise. And lastly, better use of the educational psychology service, and over time, and it would be over quite a lot of time because the training is extended, improving the supply and the use of educational psychologists. So I would suggest strongly that these 3 paragraphs repay some study.
Yes, Mary.
Can I just add to what Keir has said, and thinking of parents with children with special educational needs who may be listening, I think it's important that we also emphasise the recommendations we made around transitions, because the transitions for these children is particularly traumatic. We have very clearly stated, I think a number of times in our report, that these children should not be supernumerate, and that their places should be identified at the end of P6. And we also say, and I know there was parents here earlier today talking about the transition out of education, but We're making the big recommendation that all young people should stay in education or training of some form until they're 18. But beyond that, we very specifically say that SEN children should be supported beyond that. And in some, in one part we say, and even maybe they need support throughout their life. And I think, you know, that the needs of these children, you've said it yourself, Chair, it's about meeting the needs of these children, knowing what their needs are, and we very clearly identify transitions as a particular fault line that needs attention, as well as all the things that Keir has outlined.
Glad you referenced that. I think many members of the committee were at a protest organised by parents today at Stormont, and I just want to pay tribute to Alma and the campaign she has championed on behalf of her son Caleb, and it is that cliff edge that many children with SEN face when they leave the formal education system, and I think this committee will be looking at, is there in fact need for legislation to actually protect their journey beyond the formal education system. Look, members will want to come in, and there may well be other aspects of your report that people want to highlight, but just to stay on this theme, Dr. Bloomer really helpfully highlighted some 5 key sort of aspects of paragraph 3.32 of your report in terms of what the overall approach would need to be. And I don't want to oversimplify this, because I know there is no sort of silver bullet, we do this and we resolve it. But would it be the panel's view that if, out of the end-to-end review of SEN, if those were the key strands with clear actions, clear outcomes and a timeline for delivering those, that would go some way to addressing the concerns you've raised today?
My view, and I think the view of the panel, Chair, would be exactly that. I was just going to add to what Keir had said, and 3.32 articulates the vision we have. It's early intervention is the silver bullet. And we have to ensure the investment within that early intervention, and that is within special schools and that's within mainstream schools, and equipping the workforce and ensuring we have, and we've talked about teaching workforce there, we need to talk about all of the workforce to ensure that we have an appropriate workforce. Keir mentioned educational psychologists, but there's a plethora of other paraprofessionals that are needed to ensure that we have a system that's fit for purpose, and back to your comments at the start, to meet the needs of all children within our education system, ensure that we can do that. There is no silver bullet that will fix this quickly, but we need to start the training, we need to start the investment, we need to ensure that we have specialist schools in the right regions, and credit to the Minister in putting that plan in place, but those schools then leading with their expertise into mainstream schools, and every teacher in mainstream being part of the solution, particularly at stage 1 and stage 2.
And if we're talking about that whole journey from early intervention through to leaving the formal education system, we need health, we need economy to all be bought into this. This cannot just be education, and I think frustratingly for this committee we are struggling to get a sense of what's the plan to meaningfully collaborate. We're struggling to get to that, and I think it's essential. But I don't want to hog too much more time, because I know other members will want to come in, and I want to leave a bit of time for other issues as well. So I'll bring in the Deputy Chair, and then for anyone else to indicate.
And just on the issue of budgets and finance, I mean, some journalists picked up comments that were made last week, and Nolan also picked up on it. He did a programme on Friday. You know, that we're close to the precipice, the system's close to bankruptcy and so on. And yet you say in your report that all the recommendations are costed and achievable. And, you know, you've outlined some of the investment that's needed. You've also said we need 155 million to address the per pupil funding gap. Another 136 million shortfall in relation to special needs, capital allocation of 25 million for an estimated period of 5 years for SEN facilities. You know, we've also got the pay and grading review that's still hanging over everything at the minute, and whatever it costs to implement the recommendations that the panel has come up with. Where are we going to get that?
The problem starts right now, by the way, just in the current year. The budget allocated to the department in the current year. There are significant gaps. There's a gap of 223 million in relation to inescapables, which are services that by definition must be delivered, but there's a funding gap there of 223. And the department estimates that there's a further 250 in terms of anticipated pressures. And I think that probably means, Pat, what you've just referred to, which is the pay settlement. Now, we don't know what that might be, by the way. I mean, there's been some speculation about it, but the department is providing for an assumed pay settlement, and it includes within that figure 250 the potential cost of that. So you're starting off this year with a underfunding which is really significant. Robin, you want to?
You're absolutely right, Pat. Where's the money going to come from? That is an issue for the executive, and we're highlighted in the report 10.9, page 90. Pressure funding, as Jerry's articulated, 500 million.
Well, where's the executive going to get it, Robin? I mean, every department is under pressure. Where the executive going to get the funding to implement the recommendations here and the extra funding that you've talked about in terms of per pupil funding comparison to England and Wales?
Mm-hmm. So we're looking at the funding as what is the funding in those other jurisdictions versus the funding here. Children here have been underfunded. Yeah. An education system in Northern Ireland is underfunded. That's what we have found. Yeah. In comparison to other jurisdictions, it's exactly the same. So those figures are articulated. Your question is, where is the money going to come out of the executive budget? That's a potential question for your political colleagues. And where do we decide to fund from other governmental sources? But we're articulating that our students and pupils and young people are underfunded. That's the scale of our evidence based on the statistical facts and the evidence of what the funding arrangements are in those places. And as Jerry's outlined...
I know, but Robin, sorry for cutting across you. I mean, there's no point telling us there's a shortfall in funding. Mm-hmm. We all know that. We also know that we're in a very challenging budgetary period here, and we have been for the last 11 or 12 years with this Tory government. And you know, there's no point coming up with recommendations, say, let's give every child £100 tomorrow morning, because we know it's not there. But in effect, is that not what you're doing in this report and in terms of the recommendation? You're asking for things that really can't be delivered because of the challenging situation we're in and we have been in for the last number of years. I mean, I think one of the figures you quote is we're 145 million down over the last 11 years. It's 6% in real terms decrease. So who's responsible for that? It's the Tory government in London. And we sit beside, 30 miles down the road, another jurisdiction on a tiny island. The education system there is miles ahead of our system. So, you know, someone coming from outer space, looking at the two education systems and what's happening in the south and what's happening in the north, how do you explain that to them?
Time's very short for a response. Robin, do you want to know, Marie, you were indicating? So
I think it's to Robin, but
I'll answer it briefly. So in terms of, we're pointing out the funding difference to other jurisdictions. Our recommendations are costed. Those funding issues that are articulated are already there before you start to put in any recommendations from our report. So it's not a case of our recommendations are costing £500 million. That's not what we're saying. That £500 million pressure is there today.
Nothing. Mary, sorry.
You can come in, Pat, very briefly. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Mary,
thank
sorry.
you. Okay, sorry. You'll remember last week that I said that the cost of not investing is actually more expensive than what we're proposing. 536 million per annum is what we are spending mopping up where education has failed. We're putting forward a 20-year vision for transforming education. It does require investment. yes, there is a problem getting the money, but not getting the money is really not a solution, because you will be paying a lot more down the line in terms of meeting the needs of these young people and trying to address societal ills because you haven't invested. So the investment, while there is the funding crisis, this is about investing, and the return to the individuals, to society, to our community, to Northern Ireland PLC will put us on a footing with our neighbour. And what they've done in the last 15 years is about investment. It's so simple. It's about investment. They've invested.
You won't get any disagreement,
final
I think,
point
from anyone on this committee in that regard. The education system needs investment. The health system needs investment. Infrastructure needs investment. We haven't got it. So in the situation where we're not getting it, what does the Minister do? How does he prioritise the funding that he has? Where does he put it?
Well, our remit, as you know, was to look at the education system as a whole, but our remit is really diagnostic. I mean, what we've been trying to do is identify what is happening, what might change for the better. That's a diagnostic approach. You're asking us about prognosis, and that goes beyond our remit. I think that goes into the hands of the Assembly, which you represent.
I don't think it's the Assembly is at fault here, but I'll leave it there, Chair. Thanks.
Danny, you had indicated, but you're...
I was going to let Pat go on. I suppose it was just very much what Pat said. That was laying a question, and I was actually going to go down here today because we do know we need to invest. We need to invest to save, but we can't do it if we haven't got it to invest. And we see the challenges that we face after 14 years of austerity. Listen, you can look across the water, and the damage has been done in parts of England as well by the Tory policy. I suppose I'll just make one wee point then on post 19. We have the Autism Amendment Act, which is about lifelong learning and social opportunities. Brings you through your whole life, but yet it's not implemented either. So it brings in that problem. There's early interventions, there's lifelong opportunities there, but we have to invest. And so you're not going to get any argument here, but these things are here as well, and recommendations, and there's reports sitting on shelves, and it is frustrating, and it's going to be a very difficult job for any minister who's going to be sitting there, because the problem doesn't lie with us in the Assembly, it really does lie across the water.
I don't think you're getting a disagreement from the panel either, member. We're in a situation, Danny, where we see the lack of investment, we see the damage, we see the issues. I've articulated for the last 2 sessions that we've been with you. Our recommendations are costed. That is additional investment. The impact now today, and Pat, you asked a very good question, where do you spend the money now? Well, if we don't invest, it's back to Mary's comments, the damage that is being done on a daily and weekly and yearly basis to the education of Northern Ireland and all the opportunities for young people. Alongside that is a need to understand that there are pressures now, and those pressures are unavoidable. And money is going to have to come from somewhere to fund those pressures. So a simple example, the pay awards for teaching and non-teaching that are fully deserved pay awards to ensure that there's a comparable rate of pay to other jurisdictions. Money has to come to fund those because the money does not exist in the system. And that is a challenge for the executive, and absolutely, Pat, I agree, that's a challenge for the Treasury and the discussions with the Treasury, because Northern Ireland does not appear to have the money that it needs to run the quality of education system that is currently being run. And then we have a series of recommendations where there is additional costs and additional monies needed to improve the system.
Although long-term savings, but
yes,
sometimes you have to spend in order to save.
We do highlight inefficiencies in the system as well, but they are not going to meet the level of deficit that we are currently facing. But there's, when you talk about the need for funding and investment, you have to call out the inefficiencies, and we've done that.
That's included. So I think we agree.
Okay. David, just for a quick comment.
No, it's just a comment.
And I would ask for, if you want to come in later, it would be a quick comment.
You said earlier, Chair, that there's similarities to health service, and whenever we're getting this place established, the British government was pushing quite hard the idea that we can get this place up and running, and wouldn't be great to see that transformation in the health service, but it also applies to education, and that is exactly the point. If we want to see money saved in the long term, that transformation piece needs upfront investment as well, and I think that all parties will be pressing that with the British government as well. I think that's...
Can I just put that point, and Mary mentioned it there, transformation, absolutely, and we've highlighted the transformation that we believe is needed, and we've touched on that in our arrangement, but the savings within transformation don't come anywhere close to picking up the cost of the education system. So education in Northern Ireland, in our analysis, is underfunded, and that is on the basis of looking at other jurisdictions. So transformation will save some money, but it will not come close to meeting those costs to give a similar rate of investment that other children on this island and in Scotland, England, Wales receive. And there's different, and the tables are in Chapter 10, Volume 2 for you to see the difference in funding per student.
There is one thing occurs to me, and I will just put this out as a comment. How much you spend per pupil is ultimately a decision for a minister. So that's not necessarily what your sort of top line budget is. You get your top line budget. There are ultimately choices to ensure money gets to pupils. Those are difficult choices, and I'm not downplaying that. But I think we have to be clear that there are choices, and there are things that can be spent on the system, things that we can choose not to spend on. Now, those are difficult decisions, but I think we do need to emphasise that. But
and that's why today it was incredibly important that we highlight there are difficult decisions, but unless there's sufficient monies in the system and health possibly has been much more in the media as regards the challenges. Education is in exactly the same position.
I'll bring Kate in next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Nice to see you all again. At the last session, you talked about the importance of young people's voices being part of this. And I have 3 students who've joined me this week, and they've actually written my questions to you for today. And I have 3 of them. So if we can make sure that I get all 3 in my 5-minute slot, I'd really appreciate that. The first question is from Maeve, who has just done her AS levels at Strathairn, and she was really struck. They've been reading the review, by the way, so they've read the review, and these are the questions for it. The first question Maeve said was she was really struck by a third of students seriously considering suicide, and what, in your opinion, can be done to reduce school pressure or fix students' lack of self-belief. The second question comes from Jess, who goes to Regent, and she was looking at the funding, which is relevant to this, and 10.52, the point about 32 pairs of primary schools which were of different management type and located less than 1 mile apart and more than 3 miles by road from other schools of the same management type. Of 26 of these pairs, at least one of the schools was not sustainable. So we talked about that a bit, but what she wanted to know is, if we do fix that, what happens to the workforce? What happens to the number of teachers? And how do you address that? And then the final question is from Chloe, who's at Lagan, who's year 11. And she's really interested in new people coming to Northern Ireland, and given the increasing diversity in Northern Ireland, the growing numbers of families moving here from different countries, what's your view of how the department is meeting the educational needs of the children relocating here? And she said, please mention information on language support initiatives that promote cultural understanding and any additional assistance provided. So mental health, impact on workforce where there is that duplication, and then newcomers in Northern Ireland.
Okay, I'm going to take Maeve's question.
Can I come in really quickly, because I think it's great to hear from young people directly feeding questions into this committee. That's probably the first time we've had this other than a bespoke youth session. So if I could maybe ask one member to take each of those and take it thoroughly so that each of those questions gets a proper airing.
Okay, so I know Maeve, and she bakes very good birthday cakes, so I definitely am going to answer. I didn't know she was going to be here today, and I didn't know she was doing this, so I'm definitely going to answer Maeve's question. So her question was around mental health and the pressure that young people are under, and well-being and so on. And I think this is something, when we met young people, all the young people we met, this was to the fore with every single one of them. Their own mental health and the mental health of their cohort was something that concerned them greatly. It is something that schools are taking seriously. I've said it here before in this committee, the Department of Education has a very good wellbeing framework. It actually has been endorsed by the mental health champion that has said that it is fit for purpose and does a good job and so on. The problem is it is not seen as high value in many schools in terms of what schools achieve. So I think really what there are tools there for building up resilience, for promoting well-being in schools, and the work has been done in the background. I do think that well-being, when it hits a crisis point in a school, schools focus on it, but then it's back to the busyness, as it has been in the last month, of exams and outcomes and all of those kind of things. I think that needs to shift. I think we've got to understand that a well-educated young person needs to also be a well-rounded young person, and that young person needs to have the capacity to cope with the challenges that life throws, and life will throw many challenges at these wonderful young people that are here and others that are listening. So I think first and foremost we need to prioritise well-being in the curriculum. That's what young people told us. It needs to have better value, more pastoral care. What was crucial and can be done, and not that high a cost, is for every school to have direct access to crisis counselling. That would make a huge difference, because the staff in schools feel overwhelmed. They're not trained counsellors, and that in itself, that one fix would make a huge difference when they reach the crisis point. But let's build up the resilience of our young people. Let's prioritise. Well, I've seen excellent programmes that schools are doing on social media, and I think this is getting more to the fore because young people are using their voice, and well done to me for waiving this. She also mentioned school pressure, and we make interesting recommendations around curriculum and around the pressures young people are on. First of all, we say too many GCSEs, too much content, unnecessary. And the other thing that we say is these, what would you say, closed doors that young people encounter where they can't progress. And we talk a lot about, a pathway or many pathways where young people can see that they can continue to progress. And I think this would take some of the pressure that comes, because we create all kinds of pressure, particularly once they hit GCSE, AS level, where Maeve herself is. Young people find that they're being asked to go out and find another path because this path isn't working for them. So I think that it's really, really important that those recommendations are taken on board, and hopefully that will ease the pressure and that we will build up resilience and give it more priority.
Thank you.
My phone is struggling to find silent mode at the minute, but that will have indicated, maybe moving towards a bell, that we are run out of time on this, so we need to cover those last two questions really, really quickly. If I could ask those to be followed up briefly now.
Brilliant questions from our young people, and it's great to see you here today, and well done. Just add one thing to what Mary said. Qualifications need to change as well, and that links to the content and the scheme of assessment and the workload that puts on our young people and the workload that puts on our teaching profession. We need a radical change to our curriculum and qualifications to ensure that is taken into account. I'll cover the second point briefly, because
would have to
back
be
to Chair.
Unfortunately.
Funding, and you can see, and we may come back to area planning more in depth, Chair, and other questions. We have articulated a vision for area planning within the paper, and it's covered off in chapter 10, the numbers, and you referenced there about primary schools and amalgamation of primary schools. There is a rationalisation, there is a cost saving, but it's actually not that much. It's the benefit of the social cohesion. It's a benefit in ensuring that you have a mixed community within that village, within that small town. It's the benefit of the curriculum offer that is there, and an appropriate extra and co-curricular offer, and an appropriate pastoral care offer. So you have a better school and a better educational experience for young people from all faiths and no faiths going to that school. Within that, the impact on the workforce, we're actually struggling for workforce in teaching, so actually there's a lot of opportunity for people when you have those larger schools to come and specialisms to come to those. So I wouldn't see it so much as maybe a thought that people will lose their jobs in an amalgamation. That's not actually where we find ourselves with the teaching profession at the minute. We're actually struggling to get specialist teachers rather than the other way around. Keir might want to pick up newcomers to Northern Ireland briefly.
Third question, Keir, or whoever else wants to come in.
Just one liner on funding, and it's a follow-up to what Robin said. The problem about
This definitely needs to be a one-liner.
the problem is this, that funding follows the children. So you'll still have the same number of children no matter what type of configuration of schools you've got. So there isn't going to be tremendous savings. But as Robin has said, the benefits are mostly educational.
Thank you.
And then for the third question, and I would ask for a really brief one on this. I know these are all important issues, and members will want to give a bit of latitude, as it's the last time we have you with us for a while. But I'll hand over to Keir.
Well, I'll deal with it very briefly then. There are enormous educational benefits in bringing newcomers into Northern Ireland. I don't know if I mentioned last week, I think I might have done, the London Challenge, which is the most successful campaign so far anywhere in the UK to improve educational outcomes, particularly for disadvantaged learners. And the success of the London Challenge was down to a number of factors, schools supporting each other being probably the single most important. But the second most important was the influence of immigrant children and the fact that there are a very large number of them in London. So there is everything to be said for bringing in large numbers of newcomer children, if at all possible. But the correlation of that, corollary of that, of course, is that you do need to improve language support.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks to the students who provided those questions. Okay, Cheryl, you had indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to touch on communication within the process, the SEM process and transition. So we were at an event there recently, SEM Reform and I had done, and one of the recommendations was in terms of communication surrounding the SEM process. It's obviously, there's paper-based, there's emails, there's telephone calls. A lot of it is lost in translation. There's a stress and an anxiety around this process. And they had suggested the digitalisation of this process to make it more streamlined, to encourage that communication and to be able to monitor the process right through. Is that something that you have looked at or would recommend? And again, I understand this would require investment, it would require money. But do you see a benefit to improving that system for communication for parents?
I'm happy to maybe make a start and I'll pass over to Mark. We don't quite get to that level of operational detail for obvious reasons in our report. But anything that improves the communication is to be welcomed. Anything that makes it easier for parents and children going through the process is to be welcomed. Anything that we can do to help the educational outcomes for the young people is to be welcomed. So in a sense, it's one part of making it a process that's better understood. And back to Keir at the start, when he has said at each of our sessions now, that unfortunately parents believe that they only get help when the child is statemented, and that is true. We need to change what we do at stages 1 and 2, and that's despite the best efforts of schools and other colleagues within the Education Authority trying their hardest to do the best that they can within the system. But obviously there are massive issues for young people and their parents, and we may come back to the Chair's point about the cliff edge leaving school. We do need to change, and communication is a crucial aspect of that change. And as you go forward, and the paragraph that was referenced by Keir earlier on, outlining your changes, if they're not well communicated, we won't get the necessary benefits for young people and the changes that will lead to better educational outcomes for young people.
No, I appreciate that. I suppose we're speaking to so many parents, and I think the confusion around a telephone call, email, a letter, another letter, it's just the whole process. You don't know where you're sitting in the process, so to have something that you can refer to would improve the process for everyone.
If I was a parent going through that process, I would welcome the digitalisation. There's no doubt that would make it. But I want somebody at the end of the phone who knows my case, that I can go to, and that I don't have to repeat everything. So while the digitisation, I would completely welcome it and see how that could improve things. I think what these parents need and what the carers or representatives need for these young people, they need a trusted voice that knows their case, so they're not repeating everything. The other thing that, in terms of communication, the minute you mentioned it, what jumped in my head out was, prior to this, there wasn't the link, I think there now is, between health and education in terms of the early identification piece. Now, I think inroads are being made on that, but in terms of communication, it's the joined up what would you say, of the information around the children, around the support services, that kind of wraparound that you need. You need a lot of people who have information about the child sharing on a need-to-know basis what is in the best interest so that they can better meet the needs of the children. But yes, digitisation by all means, but for these families, they need, as I say, a trusted person that knows their case, that can give them answers, and sometimes help them wade through the plethora of information that is coming through. And yes, digitisation would help.
Yeah, and just to add one comment that came to mind when Mary was speaking there, there's a need to do it early. So it's back to your recommendation. The placements should be sorted out over the year in advance, not last, which adds to the communication issue.
No, I appreciate that. And just really quickly, the chair had touched on it about that cliff edge approach, and I know we have referred to it. In my own constituency, I know that it is the community and the voluntary sector that is doing the heavy lifting here for SEND people once they leave the education system. Again, they're the first protocol for funding cuts, and then that service is taken away from under them, and that threat almost that you feel every year. So again, I'm maybe asking a difficult question, but what would be your thoughts on that?
So we have thoughts, and they're articulated in here, and it won't be personal because I have a very close colleague who is in exactly that situation. And within the regional colleges, we have to look at a training model as well to provide an educational pathway that continues. And I know a colleague over here, I can't remember who, said as regards legislative change potentially, we need to look at providing appropriate pathways and provision for the most vulnerable in our society. And by the fact that they reach 19 years of age, it's not relevant. They need to have an appropriate pathway to have a fulfilled life. And we, as a society, have to provide appropriate pathways.
I think the committee's been clear. We're going to take that forward after summer recess in terms of looking at that in a bit more detail. Yeah.
Just a point on that. Yeah. We actually have legislation. It comes out there in the Autism Act, and if it sits there without being implemented, that was the point I was making earlier.
And I would want to add just one final point there, following on from Cheryl. You talked about that lack and challenge of communication with parents in the system. I had an answer to a written question this week which confirmed that the average caseload for a SEND Link officer is 899 pupils. I find those numbers staggering. It doesn't seem to me sustainable that a single member of staff could manage that, and I know that every one of those pupils will not be requiring day-to-day contact, but at those key transition points, a caseload like that becomes unsustainable. And I know that there is a bid in for investment and perhaps recruitment live on that, but it feels that there's a very big hill to climb there to get to the level of investment we need.
Back to our point about investment and appropriate workforce to meet the needs.
And I think it's again the workforce can also be in those arm's length bodies, and because they're providing
and
that
sometimes
direct
there's this
interface
belief,
with parents.
as we said earlier on, that it's just teachers. It is not. It is the whole system.
Their well-being is important as well as the children's young people.
Absolutely,
You have to think about the well-being of somebody that has that caseload.
I hear that from senior EA officials that would be something that they're very aware of, that staff on those roles are under huge pressure.
Something possibly that we haven't said as a panel, I know possibly the Education Committee members have said, the vast majority of people that are in the SEN system, in schools, in EA, and D, are trying really hard and working really hard and well-meaning, well-intentioned. And it's in a very difficult position. And of course, we have to look after the most vulnerable in our society. But we need to be honest about the efforts that a lot of people put in.
It's back to the point of those people probably feel they spend most of their time labouring to administer a broken system. And that's the cycle we need to break. But David, you had indicated there.
Yeah, it's just to give, just on that point as well, Chair, just we probably need to give some consideration. Even that discussion has, like we talked about third sector, we've talked about elements that relate to the economy, and so in terms of this committee leading on legislation and so on, there's probably a conversation there to be had with the other committees and so on it affects, and where it properly sits, because it would appear at the minute to be more of an autonomy issue. But as I said this morning, I definitely think there needs to be more joint working on this in general. I think that's a common theme in much of the things that we've discussed, but just some thinking about where that exactly actually sits and where's more.
I agree, and I think it speaks to the difficulty we've had as a committee to really understand who owns that collaboration piece. If it comes to the Children's Services Cooperation Act, then education does own it, but then in terms of the specific policy interventions, it sits with our departments.
We did note in the minute after our first session that you had referenced and written potentially through clerk of the committee to the economy and the health committee, and we are very keen to engage on the wider piece.
I think that's vital. It can't sit in a silo.
Chair, could I just make a suggestion that would be more productive if it was a joint meeting together? Because, I mean, we've covered the whole spectrum, but as our conversations over 3 meetings have demonstrated, we are looking at issues that outside the remit of your committee, and I think it would be productive if it was possible to have a conversation that was wider.
It's often said children don't exist in silos. Children do not exist within the committee structure of the Assembly and Executive either. They if we're going to tackle these issues, we need to find ways around that. So, did you have a question, David? And I would ask you this to give you a wee bit less time as you've done.
Yeah, no problem. It's only one question. It's just around returning to the sort of the sixth forms, just the sustainable sixth forms I wanted to ask about, and touched on it last week, obviously around the idea of the tertiary college and so on, which I like, but it's just to get an idea in terms of there's a clear, I know it will concern some, but I can see the arguments around the need for almost a rationalisation in terms of sixth forms. But you talk about establishing community sixth forms. There's others say about not complete wholesale reorganisation, but maybe looking at some of the existing. In an ideal world, do you think that it would be better that sixth forms sat separately from schools, or what's the vision in that sense?
No, we're not proposing sixth forms sitting separately from schools, even though there may be examples of a sixth form separate from schools, but we're not proposing that. Yet again, you will find on page 91 of volume 1 an outline of the numbers that we talked about, and the numbers in sixth form being 120 and 120 making 240, which would lead to a substantial change in the number of sixth forms down there. 22 new jointly managed community post-primary schools, 56 new sixth forms located. So it's quite a substantial change at sixth form. And back to, I think it was member's question here about the educational benefits. If you have a sixth form that's an appropriate size, it's the curriculum that's on offer, it's the pastoral care, it's the extracurricular, it's the co-curricular, it's the experience of sixth form, which is what it should be. Yes. And that is a substantial change in the system and the structure of sixth forms. But most of those sixth forms will be within an existing school. It won't be necessarily a new sixth form.
Okay. Yeah, but there may be in a particular area a case for a sixth form college as part of the transformation.
But it would generally be the exception rather than the rule, you'd think?
Let's put it this way. It is a huge change of itself.
Yeah.
And to the extent that people will have to volunteer for change, maybe it's best to give as much flexibility and scope as possible.
Thank you.
But you stole my question. How dare you? Listen, welcome back. Thank you so much. I too had a question just around sixth forms, because I do note in my constituency, and even when I was at school, so many people who wanted to do art or media had to go elsewhere, whether it was due to diary clashes or otherwise. You've answered my question, I suppose, around your perspective on that. But I have an additional question off the back of, I've become aware the Health Committee is meeting with their Southern counterpart shortly. And do you think it would be beneficial for us in the Education Committee to meet with our Southern counterpart? I'm just mindful maybe there's opportunities there on a cross-border basis, particularly for schools when we talk about sixth forms who are particularly in the border counties. Is there something there you think we could explore?
Well, we don't really feel competent to give the committee advice about how it can handle, but I can say that we did in fact have a significant interaction with colleagues in the south as part of our own learning process. Isabel might want to say something about that there, because I know she did spend some time in Dublin as well. But that is a dimension that we think is very important and is worth taking into account. We obviously, because Keir and Isabel are based across the water, we have the dimension coming from Great Britain. Yeah. But what you say is absolutely on. Isabel, would you like to say anything?
Just
there?
bring Isabel in there, yeah.
If I may, thank you very much, Chair. Yes is the answer, not exclusively in the South, but because in particular the areas of curriculum and qualifications and how to widen opportunities for young people to progress, that is a high on the awareness of education authorities across the kingdom and in the South. And in particular, there's been important work done in the South about qualifications at the ages of 16 and at school leaving. They're not the same as the ones in the UK countries, but there are there's been a big report, for example, about the role of teachers in assessment in the South, which is about to come out. And that will be of huge relevance. There's been reviews of the curriculum in Scotland and in Wales, and there's new suggestions in some of the manifestos in the UK for the UK election about work on the curriculum. And in our report, in page 41, in 424, we set out what we think would be the priorities for starting work on the curriculum now. And I think those are hugely important. And that doesn't mean that you shut your eyes to what's going on elsewhere. It's exactly the kind of thing that should be done with full awareness of similar work being done elsewhere, but also of the distinctive needs in Northern Ireland.
Eric, I think Keir was looking to come in.
Yep, Keir?
I was looking to come in answer to David's earlier question.
No, feel free, and then I'll bring Cara back in. I'll give you a bit extra time, Cara, that's fine.
Okay, because I think his question really relates to what we are saying about area planning and the review of the school estate, of which the rationalisation of sixth forms is a part. You were intending to discuss this afternoon anyway, and we consider it to be an extremely important part of our report. It really has three distinct aspects which come together in a way which I think is very beneficial. One is about cost effectiveness. We felt that if the education service is to seek additional resources, it's got to be able to demonstrate that it's making the best possible use of the resources that it's already got. And in relation to the school estate, it cannot do that at the present moment. There is duplication and there is waste. And therefore, rationalising the school estate is an extremely important priority, which would yield not insignificant revenue savings over time, but have some implications in terms of capital expenditure. That's where our interest in this particular topic started out. But as we progressed, we added two other dimensions to it. One is about educational improvement, making sure that every educational institution can actually provide a wide and appropriate curriculum. And that is not true in schools that are too small and in sixth forms that are too small. So it is very much in the interests of young people that the school estate should be reconfigured in a way which makes it possible for every school to offer that kind of appropriate and broad curriculum. And there is space in there, as we already touched on, for innovative solutions, including, for example, sixth form colleges. We're not recommending a changeover from school provision to sixth form college provision in any kind of wholesale way, but we do think there is space for innovative solutions in particular places, depending upon the geography and other factors. And then, of course, the third element of this bringing together is about learning together, that we think that a review of the school estate will make it much easier for young people to be taught in contexts which allow them to be learning alongside others from different community backgrounds and religious backgrounds. And again, there's scope for innovation there, and that's where our new community schools come in. So this idea of reviewing the school estate combines these three elements, cost effectiveness, educational viability and learning together, and is therefore, in our view, an extremely important part of our report. It's not an easy thing to do. We're suggesting that a specialised independent commission should be set up to undertake an overall review of the position in Northern Ireland over the space of a couple of years or so. And it will be controversial because school amalgamations always are controversial. But the benefits that could arise out of this are great indeed.
Okay, I'm happy to give you extra time.
Just to wrap up, thank you so much. That's really helpful feedback. And I do note it has come up a number of times in my constituency, particularly around young students who want to learn and engage in the Irish language. So I had one constituent, really articulate young lady, really passionate about the Irish language, and she had to go as far as Derry to accommodate wanting to do it for A-level. So
I just wanted to add to what we have been talking about in terms of what Isabel has said about learning from other jurisdictions, and I would highly recommend that. What Pat referred to last week about the GES schools, I think that, in addressing disadvantage, there's learning there. Isabel's right, they've done real reform of their curriculum and qualifications in the South, but the GES schools and the work they're doing in terms of addressing disadvantage is also worth looking at, not to replicate it, but to see how they have made it work in terms of putting the resource into the school, which and the accountability that goes with that. And they're addressing things like attendance, retention and transitions, as well as obviously the literacy outcomes and exam success. But the other key part of a GES school is the partnership with the parent or carer and with others that are involved in meeting the needs of these young learners. And can I also say, in terms of looking elsewhere, when we're looking at the SEN, and that's going to be a focus for you, best practice, we had some excellent presentations around inclusion from other parts of Europe and also from Los Angeles. So there's lots of good work going on, not for us to replicate, but to look at, read about and draw out the parts that might work here. So I would encourage you to go ahead.
Really helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I've not had any other indications. We had, and look, I was very happy that you took us in the direction you took us, and that's been, I think, a really, really helpful conversation today. I think area planning, we have CCMS in, and again, that's one of their key functions in the maintained sector. If members will indulge me, I wanted just to ask one question on area planning. In terms of sort of delivering that right sizing of the school estate and delivering the change that you articulate is needed there, would your assessment be, and I'm going to put my cards on the table, would be my assessment, but I would be interested to hear if you agree that the current system of area planning doesn't really have the capacity to do that, and that's not of any criticism of any of the people involved in that system. It's just how it's structured. There's the safety aspect of it. The substantial power that the minister has at the end of any process to effectively, as he did recently, overrule a decision flying in the face of the recommendations that came forward. So it was just to get a sense, is it the panel's view that an independent commission is the only place we can start with that reform? And I'm genuine, that's effectively my view I've set forward, so I'm not putting words in your voice.
We have it on page 86 and page 87, Chair, the answer to your question. We have said, in the short term, establishment of an independent planning commission, for exactly the reasons you're articulating, that it seems to be a slow process, and it's nobody's fault. That's where we find ourselves. And there's a need, back to what Keir articulated about the sixth forms there, to have a right sizing of the schools estate so that we have the best educational provision for our young people. And that's across all schools, and that's across special as well as mainstream. So that's why we have said in the short term, because that doesn't require the legislative change, to maybe put the shoulder to the wheel with that independent planning commission, who could come up with a Northern Ireland-wide plan, a new network of schools. And some may be easy, others will be difficult, because, as we all know, amalgamating schools and closing of some schools and building other schools and moving to new sites, all of it's a challenge, and the capital works that has to go with that. But then we do go on in 9.34 to the longer term solution of area planning, the establishment of a single strategic planning authority to avoid the problems that you have articulated in the opening of your question, that you would actually have the capacity to have an effective area planning structure as we go forward.
Although it is envisaged, or in our report anyway, it's envisaged that the ultimate decision would be the ministers, because ultimately you have to have proper accountability. The minister is accountable to the Assembly, but you do need to ensure that the ultimate accountability for decision making of that kind is with the minister, as is currently provided in the 86 order.
Ultimately, yes, the final decisions are ultimately political decisions. I suppose for me, it's just my interest would be ensuring when those decisions are taken that the rationale is clearly articulated, which I think is perhaps lacking, and that there's the capacity to make those decisions with no rationale articulated, and I don't think that represents a robust process in my view. But that is purely my view I'm articulating. So
I suppose it would be more likely that the minister would take account of a completely independent commission that is fully professional. I mean, one of the things that we say about that body is that it should be made up of people who are experienced professional educationalists.
The independence is key. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, well, look, I mean, we could talk all afternoon, but
could
I really appreciate the time. If you wanted to make a final point.
Paragraph 9.32, I think comes back to Member David's comment there about the savings. They're articulated in there in a summary in 9.32. That is a desktop exercise, so we are realistic that all of those savings would not be made, but it's all the other benefits that Keir articulated. I think Keir's looking to come in, Chair, just maybe final comment.
Yes, Keir, do you want to come in? I think it's probably appropriate. Any of his final remarks would go to yourself, so over to you.
Thank you. You asked two very clear questions there about whether or not the present area planning process is working. Do we agree with you that it's not? The answer to that is yes. And do we need something like an independent commission? And the answer to that one is yes as well. So that's two fairly short answers for you. I just want, in conclusion, Chair, and addressing your members as well, to thank you all very much for these 3 sessions that we've had with you. We are absolutely delighted that you are taking our report seriously and that you've given us the amount of time that you have. We hope that you have found the sessions very worthwhile. We certainly have. We remain happy to engage with you further if you think that would be useful, and I would just remind you of the suggestion that Sir Jerry Loughran made that arises out of our concern that we're not getting the same degree of interest from the Department of the Economy. We haven't had a meeting with that minister, for example. We would certainly welcome the opportunity to take part in a meeting of the 2 committees so that we could look at the areas of our report which are out with your remit, and indeed those areas of the report which overlap the areas of responsibility of the 2 departments and the 2 committees. So that is a suggestion that we are extremely interested in. But I'll stop there just once again by thanking you for the interest that you have taken and hoping that you have found the sessions worthwhile.
Chair, just before you conclude, there is one area that we intended to cover today, but we haven't had the opportunity. But I just want to mention it because I think it should be of great interest to the committee in the future, and that is the capital budget for education. The capital budget for education in the last 5 years has not exceeded £50 million for major projects in any year. That has been the highest level of spend in the last 5 years. The department estimates that the highest level of spend on major capital in the next 5 years will be only £50 million. And yet we have a whole stack of major projects lined up, including, as I mentioned earlier, 400 million for special education. The department estimates that it would take 44 years at the current level of capital funding to achieve all the outcomes that are already determined and announced, and that is really not workable. There, as you used the word prioritisation earlier, and you're quite right, we're not going to be able to fund everything, so there's going to have to be prioritisation.
Thank you. And I mean, I will just extend the thanks of the committee for the time that you've been prepared to give us. Those have been really wide-ranging discussions, and I think they give us an awful lot of food for thought for the remainder of the mandate. I think your suggestions around engagement concurrently with the other committees who are relevant in this space is a good one, which we'll definitely consider. And I would hope that this is not the last engagement we have. We await the department's response and recommendations around the review and what can be taken forward, and that may well be an opportune time to engage again. But we thank you for your time.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
While the panel see themselves out, I was just going to suggest maybe just a quick 5-minute comfort break, and then we will move on to item 8. We just move just a closed session while we do that.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.
Okay, and if you can bring the witnesses through as well. Just before we move on to item 8, can I just check with Rob? Because the audio will have been lost there when we moved out of open session. Can you hear us okay, Robbie?
No.
I'll take that as a yes. Okay. So while we just bring the next panel of witnesses through, I'll just introduce item 8 on the agenda, which is an introduction from CCMS. It's their first time before us in this mandate, and a specific focus on area planning. So while you guys just get settled, I would refer members to the briefing paper from the clerk at page 678, the paper from CCMS at page 680, and then at page 16 of tabled papers there's a copy of CCMS's presentation and also a further report entitled Catholic Schools Delivering for Communities in the 21st Century, and that's at page 686. So that's the introduction bit done. So over to a welcome now. So we're very glad to have you here today. So extend a welcome to the committee to Eve Bremner, the Chief Executive of CCMS, Magella Corrigan, Director of School Planning and Provisions, and Michael Keenan, Director of Education at CCMS. So as was the format with the independent panel, we'd ask for a presentation or opening remarks. I think you may have a presentation you want to run through of up to 10 minutes, okay. And then we'll move to question and answers. Now with the independent review panel, obviously wide ranging, and we jumped around a lot of topics, but I would ask there will be, I'm sure all members will want to come in, so we'll keep it to 5 minutes per contribution for question and answer. So again, just to remind everyone just to be focused on that. But at this stage, over to you for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair and Committee, for having us here today, along with my colleagues. I do recognise that you've had input and presentations from the independent panel before and other sectoral bodies and my colleagues in the department and the EA, so I'll try not to duplicate, as it were, and you'll understand what I'm going to try and do. First and foremost is represent the work of CCMS and our schools, and some of this may be very familiar to some more than others, particularly those who have been to our schools, as it were. So I hope I'm not, as it were, teaching Granny to suck eggs, but I hope it'll be insightful as well, because I think a lot of things have changed in education over the last 5 years, and it's important that as a new committee you understand the context that we're operating in. I would also say that even though I'll be representing CCMS and our schools and our sector, I think you'll find significant commonality between my input and the input you've had, and even the input we've had this afternoon. And to that extent, I'm repeating many of the messages that you have said and the panel have said before me today, and it is fundamentally about advocating for all children. A child is a child is the child, and for the wider education system. So let me tell you a wee bit about who CCMS is. We're established in legislation back in 1989, and fundamentally we were set up as a strategic tier of management and representation of Catholic maintained schools, and our founding aim and our core aim has been and really continues to be about raising the standards of our pupils and improving the outcomes and life outcomes. Our structure, the council structure, is also set out in that legislation. We have a 36-member council, we have 5 diocesan education committees, and our duties, our statutory duties that we were set up to deliver, are in the same legislation. Our funding at present only enables us to employ about 45 staff. I'll come to that later on. And at the moment we've had to rationalise to a single office, and we're based in Lisbon. So before I talk further, I suppose, about CCMS and our role, first and foremost, I want to talk about our schools and our pupils and provide an insight into that. So CCMS is the managing authority with responsibility for over 430 Catholic maintained schools. That's across all phases. So we have preschools, primary, post-primary, and a special school. And there's about 125,000 pupils attend our schools, so we have around 40% of the school estate. Our schools are proudly all ability. And over 30% of our pupils are entitled to free school meals, and that's compared to an average across the other sectors of about 19%. And about 20% of our pupils would have special educational needs. Also, I think it's really important to point out that 50% of newcomer pupils choose to attend our schools, and we have 1,500 pupils who are educated through the medium of Irish. And finally, I'm going to address this one now. Our schools are fundamentally an extension of the communities and the populations that they were established in and the neighbourhoods that they serve. And I know there's extensive dialogue about the representation and diversity across our school estate. And to some extent, our schools are an outworking of the environment and the communities they serve. But what I would say is that our schools are evolving alongside wider society. And to that extent, there's now 5 times the number of children in our schools who do not come from a traditional Catholic background than did 20 years ago. And we have about 18,000 pupils involved in formal shared education, let alone, frankly, the day-to-day work that has to be done by our schools to survive and provide the curriculum. So I think it's important just to reflect maybe the schools that we have now versus the schools that, when I was a child, there were. Things have changed. So if we talk about our role in terms of CCMS and our vision, we want every child to have the best start in life, and as I mentioned before, our founding aim is about raising standards, and the legislation saw that our contribution to that was primarily around the 4 balloons, as it were, that you see on the screen. Our 4 core aims are about appointing and recruiting teachers and school leaders, about planning our provision, otherwise known as area planning, about supporting the effective management of our schools by our boards of governors, and really representing and providing advice to the department or anybody, as it were, on behalf of our sector. So we'll talk about those in a bit more detail and specifically how they contribute to raising standards. So if we think about our leadership and our teachers, the old adage that a school can only be as good as the teachers it has is true. So CCMS understands that for pupils to achieve their fullest potential, we must have the right people, the right place, the right time. And you've heard that in relation to SEN, but it's true of all school and educational settings. At present, we, as in CCMS, coordinate about 700 vice principal, and teaching appointment exercises every year, and our leaders are recruited using a common competency framework. The independent review has highlighted the urgent need to invest in continuous professional development. But CCMS has no formal duty or funding in this to provide training or development, as it were, to leaders or boards of governors. But we are creative. We have a rolling programme of engagement with our first-time principals in particular, with a very active principals reference group. And also we pride ourselves on knowing our schools. Part of, I think, the strength that was reflected in the independent reviews, we know our schools, we have relationships with them, and that means that we see things happening early. We can provide support early, but we can also challenge if we're seeing underperformance. And our multidisciplinary teams and our engagement with our colleagues in ETI or the department allow us to have that picture and understanding of our schools. We started towards the end of the panel's input to talk about area planning. And I suppose I want to continue that conversation in terms of placing area planning in the context of raising standards, because it's called area planning today, but it's something that CCMS has done really since it was established. CCMS has a long history of taking this approach, because we do understand that it's really important that we use the resources we have and the estate that we and others have in a more equitable manner, and to provide high quality provision and access to the curriculum across the school estate. And a result of this work by CCMS and trustees, an additional 10,000 pupils are now in more accessible, more sustainable schools, and we've created 40 new, more sustainable schools over the last decade. I would stress, however, that area planning priorities and policy are set by the department and the minister, and CCMS is responsible and accountable for delivering against these. Organisationally, we're invested in that because we see the outcome of a more equitable and sustainable state for pupils and the benefits of that. And we do believe, even though it's difficult, it's for the greater good. But it is ultimately, as you said, the minister and the department who make those decisions and set those priorities. And at present, we are instructed, as it were, to deliver against the priorities of composite classes, unsustainable or smaller sixth forms, and schools that aren't providing enough of a balanced curriculum up to GCSE. So that's what we're held accountable for. We do that in consultation with trustees who fundamentally established and own the schools, and we work really closely, frequently, I have to say, daily almost with EA and our other colleagues across education to support that approach. But notwithstanding, it's a really challenging and complex process. I don't think you would get any argument from us in terms of that, and there's still a huge amount to do. In our own sector, we have about 26 schools with less than 60 pupils still in existence. We also know that the demographic in terms of primary school intake is going to dip by about 20%, and in fact we're seeing that already in school intakes this year. So I know this is a difficult space, and I also recognise it's particularly difficult for elected representatives at a constituency level. So all the more important that we shift the narrative about this being about outcomes and we move from it being a space of combative and conflict focused on an individual school or an individual institution to the interests of the system as a whole and the learners as a whole in the immediate and long term. So I also just briefly reflect on the fact that even though we have a very direct support role and services to deliver, we also pride ourselves in trying to shape policy, shape practice. I think we were pioneers of shared education. You see a photograph there of the first shared education campus in Northern Ireland, which is in Limavady. On Friday, we'll be celebrating another shared education campus. Strull is obviously a live project. So we're very, very proud of the fact that we do engage with innovative practice. We're key contributors to the SEN end-to-end review as well as the end-to-end review on school improvement, and we've worked really closely with ETI in terms of the inspection process and piloting that and encouraging our schools to be involved in that, as well as what I'm currently chair of management side in terms of the Teachers Negotiating Council, and working very actively in terms of moving forward some of the issues around teaching workload and workforce, etc. What it couldn't do, though, is leave today with reflecting, as it were, on the ethos and values, because I think we're really fortunate in Northern Ireland to have a diverse system of schools and a diverse range of schools who are rightly proud of their ethos and of their values. And it's this ethos that does underpin the values of our schools, but it does not define who should, does and could attend our schools. And if I can put it most simply, you do not need to be Catholic to attend a Catholic school. And indeed, there's clear evidence that many don't, and particularly, I have to say, in grammar sector with academic selection. The ethos of our schools is to embrace and celebrate all individuals, their talents and their beliefs. And I think it's really important that that's recognised and celebrated and respected. So as a result of that, I really do want to celebrate and profile, as it were, the achievements of our schools and our sectors, of our sector. We're still the highest performing sector across non-selective schools. And you can see that 90% of our pupils are leaving, or not leaving, but achieving, I should say, 5 GCSEs at grade A star to C. We have 96% of our schools who are compliant with a pretty challenging, I have to say, entitlement framework at Key Stage 4. And you'll also see that we're closing that gap, that ambition of raising standards we're achieving. So we've seen in the last decade a 14% increase in the number of pupils who are achieving 5 GCSEs or 2 A levels at A star to C. And that's a significant achievement in my view, and to be credited fundamentally to our schools. So, and I think the other thing I should point out is that's particularly not impressive, but it's noteworthy given the known link between attainment and deprivation and the diversity of our intake. So I think it's worth recognising that. So what are the challenges? And I said you'll see commonality in that. We're very conscious of the huge challenges, I have to say, across education. Massive. Robin referred to challenges with recruitment. We're seeing that. One of our large primary schools, 3 attempts to recruit a principal, unsuccessful. We know that their schools are challenged to get specialist teachers, etc. The panel have talked very openly, I have to say, about school finance and capital funding. I suppose what I want to do is reflect as an organisation how challenging that has been for us. So we've seen a 40% real terms cut in our budget in the last 10 years. Our staffing has cut by almost 2/3 over the last decade. And despite that, we're seeing a rise, for example, in the demand for services. We're seeing a rise in the number of duties that we have, and we certainly are seeing a rise in the complexity of some of those duties, and I suppose the risk and adversity that's associated with some of that. And we're also seeing a very direct hit in terms of our schools. You'll see there, in fact, Sir Jerry referenced it before he left. The impact in terms of our estate is significant. We've 8 major capital schemes and 8 school enhancement projects paused. Setting aside the ones that have been moved forward, we have 8 that are sitting in limbo, as it were. So it has been extremely challenging, I have to say, for us as an organisation. We don't talk about it publicly hugely because we don't want our reputation or our standing to be diminished, but it's not sustainable for an organisation to deliver more duties and services with diminishing resources. That being said, I do want to end on a positive note, because fundamentally those are the values that we have. And again, I want to reinforce that CCMS really does want to be part of any process of reform or transformation that's ultimately about improving outcomes for children. We're not here to be defensive of a structure or an institution. We are here, however, to represent and to promote those aspects of our organisation or our sector which we feel should be respected, valued, and in fact others could learn from. I would commend the Minister, I have to say, and the panel for raising the public profile of education and the dialogue around that and the importance of education in terms of long-term outcomes for people and wider society. We've got a window of opportunity, I believe, with the cessation of industrial action for now to collectively work with our trade union colleagues to reimagine the profession and ensure that it continues to be invested and valued. But it'll require innovation, compromise, bravery and funding. That being said, I believe there's a willingness in the independent review acknowledge that the current arrangements in terms of workforce and terms and conditions, etc., are not fit for purpose, teaching and non-teaching. Finally, I don't want to leave without acknowledging the publication of the independent review. You'll understand it would be inappropriate for me to make formal comment before we've had formal statement, as it were, from the Minister or the Department. But what I would say is that the review has triggered dialogue, helpful and positive dialogue, and it challenges us all, I think, to again focus on the best interests of the people. We're ready as individuals, as an organisation, and as a sector, have to say, to play our part in that progress. And I trust that I have illustrated the positive impact that CCMS and our schools have had on pupils' outcomes. Indeed, you'll be aware from the briefing note that we are keen to innovate and progress and have submitted a bid as part of the Public Services Transformation Fund to try and move forward more innovative models such as jointly managed schools, and we await the outcome of that bid. So my last message to you, I suppose, would be to urge you to ensure that those achievements, those learnings, those positive aspects of our organisation or our sector are not lost or dismissed in moving forward. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, as it were, but that we move forward together and we ensure every child is happy, learning, succeeding, just as we all would wish. So I hope that's provided you with a bit of insight into our work. Rapid run through. I'm very happy to take any questions that you have on that or other aspects of our work.
Thank you, Eve, and that's really, really helpful initial presentation. And I think it's a bit of a pattern on committee, but because we've come into the mandate late, there are many briefings. We sort of feel like this should have happened earlier, but it is just we're just have had so much to try and cram in a really short window between now and summer. So it's great to have you here before we do break up for recess. And I think it is good to finish with some positives there in terms of opportunities in the education sector. We hear a lot of doom and gloom because undoubtedly the budget position is dire, and it presents challenges for everybody, but we should be mindful of those opportunities. So no, that was very helpful. I would like just to begin by picking up on one of those things in that final slide, because I noticed in your brief, and I have to say it was news to me, so my interest was piqued, and it detailed that bid, the collaborative bid with other sectors around the jointly managed school model. And the bid that went into the Public Services Transformation Fund. Can you give us more information on that? I mean, I don't mean you can obviously not prejudge the outcome of it, but I mean, I have to say I wasn't even aware that would have been something that there was capacity to do. I assumed that would have had to come from the department, so I was really interested to see that. So any more information you can give us on that, on what you would maybe foresee if that were to be successful, what that might look like and how that any resource would be used?
Sure. I mean, what I would say is the invitation to submit a bid was extended via the department, so ultimately it'll be with the department to determine if it's submitted to DOF. And we've worked very closely, I have to say, with the department in terms of shaping that bid. It was relatively quick turnaround, but what I would say is what we wanted to illustrate is that there is this appetite to do things differently if it is the right thing for children. And the concept of a jointly managed school is something which has frankly been kicked about and knocked about for years, and our sense, and certainly the sense of the transferors, of the trustees, EA, Control School Support Council, was all that there was an appetite to do this and let's try it. But actually, when we're firefighting with the day-to-day demands, there isn't the space sometimes to take forward the innovative work. And so hence the bid was to, I suppose, to get us all in the same place and move that forward, and then realistically to facilitate what could be quite delicate conversations and quite difficult conversations in terms of how this could happen. But I think if the will is there, it's something that can be achieved. And if that appetite is there from those sectors, it's something that I personally and as an organisation and the others who are part of that bid would all be keen to see move forward.
So that, just to be clear then, that bid would be, if successful, would be around progressing the sort of development work around that model. It would be around developing what the model for delivery of that might look like. Have I understood that correctly?
The aspiration was to move it from both to formalise the concept and how it would operate, to get into that nitty gritty, but to move it through to progression to identifying where that could realistically be delivered, to engage with those communities, to engage with representatives around that. So it wasn't just a theoretical piece, it was about helping to achieve it. I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah, Chair, maybe just, part of the discussion, obviously, around area planning, sometimes there are challenges raised around its pace and also, the options that it brings forward. But we are quite limited, really, legislatively in terms of some of the options that we actually have in terms of rationalising the schools estate. And this is an opportunity for us to look at some more creative, collaborative models. And that would be really very, very welcome, because it's all very much part of schools seeing the opportunity for change and actually stepping forward and embracing that change, whereas currently there naturally is a fear of change whenever you're looking at a provision in an area.
A way potentially of moving that conversation beyond your school's not sustainable, therefore it's moving to closure, that there are other solutions around how we can ensure communities' needs are being met to ensure that service is still there. And I think that's very welcome. And you mentioned some other bodies, so that was CSSC and EA,
Education Authority, and the trustee service as well, and the transfers.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we'll await the outcome of that. I want to pick up on area planning, and there's much we could probably raise around budget as well, because obviously your role is primarily to support those schools and in the maintained sector, and there's no doubt the budget position is extremely challenging, and I think it probably was well set out in the previous session just what that looks like. So obviously you do have a key role in relation to area planning, and I would like to just get, similarly as to how I asked the panel, just your sense of the current effectiveness of the system. And I want to be really clear, I'm not passing any comment on anything I say about area planning about anybody involved in the system. It is about the system itself that I'm interested in. I think everybody's doing their best within the system. I want to be clear on that. But would you be able to give the committee a sense of someone who is right in the middle of that system, your assessment of how effective it is in delivering area plans that actually meet the needs of communities, that are cooperative, collegiate, that are transparent, and that are timely as well? I suppose that would be the sort of the areas that I would have an interest in this.
I'll maybe say a few words and then hand over to Magella, who's by far the expert, as it were, in this. But I think what I would try to do is distinguish from whether it is the system per se that is broken in terms of area planning versus the handling of individual projects, as it were, if that makes sense. What I would say is it is an extremely frustrating process, I think, for most parties involved in it. And I think that is primarily because it is a process which has inbuilt conflict and is more focused on trying to evidence failure and lack of sustainability than about having to articulate the benefits. And I actually think that's where we need to shift the dial. If we are all in the space of having agreed what we want for our children, what we want them to be able to access, why does the debate come around whether that is the scenario or situation in a school as opposed to what is the best solution to that? And so what we find is there is a very difficult to have to say conflict for us, in that there's an onus, and rightly so, for us to take an area approach, but actually the process itself becomes focused on the individual institution and also has inbuilt conflict with therefore that community, as it were, and to be upfront with those who represent it. It is very rare that we have somebody standing by our side saying, we know that there is a better option for these children. It's really difficult to do this, but there's a better option. That just does not happen. Rather, we face public, I have to say, challenge. We face legal challenge. That introduces huge amounts of delay. There are capital issues in terms of delivering any solutions in the first place. So I think there's many ways that we could improve it. I personally think there's ways that could be done without legislative change, that could be done. That would be my view. There's ways of improving that process. I think there's also a cultural shift for us as leaders, and I include everybody in that room in terms of supporting communities through that process. So we would welcome the opportunity to move that forward, and I'll maybe hand over to Magella.
Thank you, Eve. Thank you, Chair. There was a lot in your question that could fill up the
Apologies.
entire session.
You're like bang on about this. So apologies.
Just to sort of to reinforce, first of all, as has already been mentioned by Eve, area planning from the point of view of all the area planning partners is a very collaborative process. All of our partners work very well together, and we do very much have an area of focus. However, as Eve says, it is a challenge then when you come to bring forward projects, because that tends to focus in on a more local level, and then it often focuses on an individual institution. And people are naturally afraid of change, and there's often an historic view taken of this is the way provision has always been in this area, and it can be quite difficult to change the dial to, but what might the area need in the future for the young people in the future, and based on the demographics in the area for the future. The current process, yes, can seem slow, but it is the process that we have in terms of bringing forward a development proposal. And one of the positives about the development proposal process is it allows that full-scale consultation on the proposal that's been taken forward. It allows engagement with all the school stakeholders. It looks at engagement with neighbouring schools to see what the impact would be there. And then there's an open process as part of the statutory objection period where anybody can comment. And that means that everybody feels that they have the opportunity to put forward their opinion as to the proposal that's been taken forward. And I do think that's important, because part of the challenge for area planning, in a sense, is getting that sort of stakeholder buy-in. They may not necessarily agree with the outcome when the decision is made, but it is really important that people have had the opportunity to put their input in and feel at least that they have had a chance to express their opinion. Part of the challenge is, I should say, yes, we have seen it be very successful. It's often not during the process, but post-implementation, that's when people will say, you know what, actually the kids are happier in the bigger school. Or we have specific examples of where children have transitioned to another school and within a year are, you know, head boy or head girl at post-primary or whatever. So yes, but it does take that legacy view, and we are actually doing a wee piece of work at the moment in terms of looking back over projects over previous years to take some learnings from that. Part of the challenge, I think, of area planning, as Eve says, is that systemic view that we all have to take versus that more local view, and also the lens at the moment, which is that area planning is viewed as a negative process rather than a positive opportunity to affect change and improve educational provision in an area. So we all have a wee bit of work to do in terms of moving the dial for that. The other aspect, I think, is that, you know, we heard the independent review panel speaking there around the need for change in the schools estate. I think part of the challenge we face is we maybe haven't necessarily brought our stakeholders to that place. There isn't necessarily an agreement that there is a need to reorganise the schools estate. People do challenge the Sustainable Schools policy and disagree with its priorities, but I suppose the question we all have to face is, given the 20% fall in primary school demographic, given the financial situation, given the fact that, for example, in our estate alone, and this replicates the estate as a whole, over a quarter of our schools are teaching less than a tenth of our pupils. Is that status quo something that can continue to progress, given the challenges that we face? There's always a fear of closure whenever area planning is mentioned in an area. We need people to sort of look to see closure isn't the only option in area planning, but it often does end up being the only option if schools haven't recognised their sustainability challenges earlier in the process. And if they come early in the process, there's more opportunity to look at creative solutions. But if you're looking then at a very, very small enrolment, it does make it harder to see what other options there are for sustainability.
I just asked that was it over a quarter of schools teaching a tenth of
less than a tenth of our pupils?
Okay. I mean, those are quite stark figures. I mean, my view would be is that there is a need to look at the sustainability of the schools estate. I'll ask one final question and then I'll hand over to other members. Given the independent review's recommendations, do you feel that an independent commission, a one-time overview of the system and what is needed, In terms of that full area-based approach, do you think that an independent commission would be a positive intervention in that space to maybe free up all the stakeholders to actually then get on with the work without maybe having to have those real-time discussions about is this the direction of travel or not?
We haven't had a formal opportunity, as it were, to comment on this. What I would say is that I think there is merit in there being a strategic plan for provision. And in fact, that's something, as I said, CCMS did 20 years ago, but within its own sector. I think that approach on a cross-sectoral basis is important. That being said, I think we do need to recognise the diversity across our sectors. We need to respect the role, for example, of our trustees and transferors and others in terms of schools. I would have some concern that introducing new bodies is an additional structure, as it were. So I think the first protocol should be looking at the structures and processes that we have and making them better. But we've yet to discuss that formally, I have to say, with our council, and I'm really interested to know the ministers' and the department's view. I would say it wouldn't have been our assessment that could have been done without legislative change, given the duties that, for example, we have.
And Chair, also I think we wouldn't foresee that could be done without significant funding either, because in terms of any significant change that will require investment in schools, so that is a challenge. And I suppose the other thing for us to consider as well is that no doubt you, as we do, get significant correspondence when a single proposal is being discussed in terms of area planning. It's really important that whatever discussions are taking place, that stakeholders are bought in to the process.
That is very helpful. I will hand over to the Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I want to focus on the Irish medium units in the Catholic maintained sector, and I'm wondering, do you have a strategy or a vision for the development and support of Irish medium units within the sector?
I'll maybe introduce this and then bring Michael in, if that's okay, in terms of, and Magella, you will have something to say in terms of the process. We have about 1,500 pupils who are educated through the medium of Irish, and that's about 20%, as I understand it, of overall Irish medium. We work really closely, I have to say, with Corlia in terms of both in respect of individual provision, but also in terms of their strategic plan and vision for education through the medium of Irish, where the responsibility lies, as it were. One of the things that, fundamentally, if we bring it back to our aim and our outcome of raising standards, one of the things that we want to ensure is that we are facilitating that, as it were, and making sure that children have access to high quality education, and ensuring that when those units are established, that they're set up to flourish and sustain. And I know Magella has some information in terms of the growth in our units where we have done that successfully. So to that extent, we are currently in the process of developing protocols to help, establish, to ensure that we're clear on what that provision would look like, how we make it successful, how we make it sustainable, what are the conditions we would want for those pupils and those schools. And if you don't mind, I'll hand over to Michael on that.
And just come on it from an educational point of view, I suppose the importance there is, as Eve has touched upon, is the quality of education, regardless of whether children in a particular school are being educated through the medium of English or the medium of Irish. And I think it's very important that we're starting to look at protocols around how that works in our schools. There's an ongoing piece of work within both the Education Directorate and the Area Planning Directorate. And we're looking to make sure there's a quality of opportunity there, that when planning staff development takes place, it's inclusive of all staff, whether they're working in Irish medium unit side of the school or the English medium side of the school. And I suppose there are other challenges for us as well. It was touched on earlier around getting staff, teachers who have the qualification to work in there, and we play an important part in talking to the further education, higher education colleges around that. So I suppose it's making sure that regardless of which unit of a school children are in, they're receiving the highest quality of education.
And just from what you're saying there, is there some suggestion that the children in the Irish medium units are getting a lesser quality of education than those in the English medium part of the school?
Oh no, and that certainly wouldn't have been where I was coming from at all.
Yeah, and
sorry, Pat, if I may, I think what we were trying to do was address this ongoing conflict between the demands around sustainability and the want the duties, as it were, around Irish medium. That has been something which has been challenging, and Corley, you know, Zina G would talk about that openly. So it was really about making sure that, you know, what is our vision for Irish medium provision in an area? How do we make that sustainable? How do we help those units flourish? You know, not setting them up to fail, setting them up to be you know, positive, flourishing experiences.
But there's also an issue of sustainability in terms of where some schools are failing, but an Irish medium unit can be included within the school. It can enhance the sustainability of a school. Is that not the case also?
Well, I wouldn't. That school is a school in its wholest sense, and the Irish medium unit is part of that. So I'm not sure. Are you making a point about English medium or Irish medium, or the school in its broadest sense?
I suppose the reason I'm raising this issue is because I have been talking to some stakeholders and parents, and many of them feel that CCMS set up obstacles when schools want to establish a unit within the school. Others have said they feel like the poor second cousin within the school. So, for example, Swatra School has been trying to get an Irish medium unit since 2017. My colleague Francie Malloy has been involved in that. St Bridget's in Turkeen in Mahara, they applied recently for a new principal, and yet the criteria that were set out for a new principal didn't take account of the fact that 2/3 of the pupils in the school are going through Irish medium. They have also said that when funding was made available for different programmes, that they didn't receive that funding, and the Engage programme was specifically mentioned. So I suppose the issue here is that there's a perception within the sort of those who support and promote the Irish medium or education through the Irish medium, feel that CCMS are actually an obstacle. How would you respond to that?
Well, without wishing, frankly, to speak about, you know, some quite complex, I have to say, situations, there's aspects of that narrative that I feel are inaccurate and do a disservice, I have to say, but I don't wish to air that, as it were, in committee business. But what I would say is we're extremely proud, I have to say, of the provision that we have in Turkey, and it's one of the most flourishing, successful units that we have. The school, in terms of the school as it was before the Irish medium unit, that was something that was developed, you know, in collaboration with that local community, and I believe all those in that area take pride in. And I'm very proud, I have to say, that of the leadership that has been in that school, and in fact the new principal that's there, and the reflection that individual is of that unit and that community. So, I just think some of those aspects are inaccurate. And in terms of
I'm not calling into question the integrity of whoever has been appointed. I'm just making the point: why, given the fact that 2/3 of the pupils in the school are going through Irish medium, when the criteria were set out for the recruitment of a new principal, why was that fact not included?
Well, I can address that pretty directly in that we have a competency scheme, I have to say, for all leadership, for all principal and vice principal posts. I think we've talked earlier about the diversity that we have across our schools, and some of our schools have 16 languages within the schools, have a diversity of religious beliefs, etc. What we don't want to do is have any post where we are deliberately excluding anybody from the ability to apply. So in terms of that, I have to say that we wanted to ensure that the pool was as wide as possible, and that frankly that those who were recruiting that post had the opportunity to choose somebody who they felt could reflect and support the makeup of their school. And there was a huge amount of work put in with those governors and that panel to make sure that the process did reflect that, and did reflect the nature of that school and the fact that there was Irish medium provision in it. So I don't think we're very confident in terms of that school had the ability to choose somebody who would be supportive and reflective of the needs of that school, and I believe are very pleased. And it's not about the individual, but it is about the process allowing boards of governors to choose.
Just now you mentioned the process in terms of
a quick question and quick answer. Yeah.
In terms of a school wanting to establish an Irish medium unit, what is the process, and what role does Corlia play in that process?
In terms of planning, the only people who can bring forward a proposal, as it were, for provision in a Catholic maintained school, is CCMS. And I spoke earlier about kind of the conflict in terms of policies and things that we have to speak to. So that, in terms of Irish medium, it is a collaborative effort, I have to say, with Corlia in terms of identifying need, understanding what area provision would look like. Is it sustainable? Where should it be placed? But it also has to meet the requirements of the department's policies and procedures around sustainability, etc.
No, and maybe just to follow up on that, Pat, just because there were a few sort of points that you'd made earlier on, we do really see opportunities for collaboration in terms of Irish medium provision in our schools, not least because of the fact that there is so little capital investment for any new school, for example, should it start from scratch. Also, the challenge of starting a new school from P1 on your own, when if you have a unit established in a school, you already have an established and capable management structure there to support the provision in the school. So there are all sorts of benefits, symbiotic benefits there that we would certainly see. I suppose in terms of how the process works, it's the same as anything else. Schools come to us with a proposal and we then assess that, and it will be assessed, as he says, against the departmental policy, because that's ultimately how it'll be judged when it goes in. The challenge in some areas is there are only a certain number of children. As we know, that number of children are dropping. So in terms of where a school is proposing to bring in an Irish medium unit, we have to look very carefully at how that then will affect the balance in the school. So if, depending on, in terms of increasing the sustainability of the school, Pat, that's often a challenge, because if there are only a certain number of children in an area, what Irish medium provision does is redistribute the children within a school, but it often doesn't necessarily bring in additional children to the school depending on where the neighbouring provision is. So that's part of the challenge. But certainly we have 2 live projects at the moment that we are taking through. We just in terms of our primary provision, we've seen a 7% increase in our Irish medium units. In our post-primary, we've seen a 41% increase. But we do have to be careful in terms of where we put them in. The school does need to be of a reasonable size to be able to support then not having very, very small classes, for example, in the Irish medium side, resulting in multiple composites, which doesn't help them with the quality of educational provision and the linguistic learning.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you all very much for being here. I have a number of questions. It was such a fantastic presentation that you give us. Just around, I had attended 2 Catholic secondary schools, and I do note with the school estate, many of the buildings are former convents, and some of them are very, very old. You had touched on there that 8 projects were paused. Would you have to hand just the information around those specific schools? Do you know what schools they are, or do you have that?
We can send you specific schools.
Absolutely. We've just recently done a kind of a programme review of our SEPs and our majors, so we'll happily share that with the committee afterwards.
I think it is worth saying actually that, well, as you've already heard from previous input, practically everything's paused on the capital side of the house, I'm afraid. So the challenge there is that currently capital funding is concentrating on special and on keeping schools open and children safe. So very little has moved in the capital space, and even where the Minister has mentioned, releasing 7 of the post-primary that came through on the 22 call, that again is to get them to ICT stage, but whether or not they can then move into contract and actually, cutting a sod on the ground, as Sir Jerry said earlier on, we're looking at potentially a 44-year wait for the ones that are currently in the process. So very little is moving on the capital side at the moment, and the departmental staff, because of budget constraints, are limited to really progressing in terms of majors and SEPs, those that are already in contract, and that's pretty much all that's moving.
That's really interesting. Just my next question there is just around newcomer children. I had spoken with a Catholic primary school principal who has taken in, I think it was 20 asylum seeker children over the past year, and he talked about the dire need for the Department for Education and the Education Authority to liaise more with the housing executive, because we're getting a situation whereby children are starting in a school say in my constituency, and then they're moved and they're housed in Belfast and all their friend circles, and there's so many issues there. Can I just ask, can you talk us through, can I hear your perspective around, we have newcomer children, we want them to feel integrated and part of our school communities. What more do you think the department could be doing to support those children in Catholic maintained schools?
Well, first and foremost, I would pay tribute to our schools, I have to say. I think they have opened their arms, rightly, as we would want, in line with our ethos. I'm extremely proud of them. The challenge that you referenced there is one that I encountered with a former hat, I have to say, in the Education Authority, in terms of, the realities for those children and families being uprooted and having established, sometimes with challenge, within their communities, it's extremely difficult for them. I know that we, as an organisation, have a very close relationship with the Full Service Community Network, who does a lot of work with schools to provide support in terms of English as an additional language and counselling, etc. I think we would all reflect upon some of the difficult decisions that have had to be made in terms of short-term funding, and some of that short-term funding which has been cut or no longer exists is frankly impacting upon some of those most vulnerable children and leaving, as it were, schools to try and pick up some of the slack. So if I would just urge the ability for there to be sustained funding for some of those things, and not only sustained funding, but for it to be incorporated within the resource, as it were, of our education system, as opposed to an added extra. And Michael, you've significant experience in this.
Coming around, and it's a resource issue again. I suppose that when we talk to principals, some of those children are coming with very complex needs, not just educational needs, but also some of their past experience and their well-being needs, the need for counselling, the need for even simple things about language interpretation. So there's a significant resource that needs to go, and part of the problem is the funding takes a period of time to follow that child coming into the school, yet the school has that child at that time. Very often they're children who maybe have not had an opportunity to be in a formal system, and fitting into a class of 30 or 31 or 32 is just outside the experience. So we're looking at additional staff would be a magnificent answer to that, not just teaching staff but support staff. All the wellbeing supports that Eve has already talked about, like the Healthy Happy Minds programmes specifically directed to newcomer children, and even support for parents. We're looking for parents who are coming to engage with a very complicated school system, and possibly not with formal education themselves, or certainly with language barriers. So there's a whole gamut. It's not just as simple as the direct education to the child in the classroom at that time.
And then just to wrap up then, I'm just mindful of time.
No, it would be brief, and I'm emphasising at this stage brief.
It's more like a yes or no sort of answer, just around, if you happen to know, so for newcomer children who come from traditionally Catholic countries like Poland, I'm just mindful, are their parents made aware that in Northern Ireland we do have free Catholic education? Because when I was speaking with some principals, he had made it clear there's some countries in Europe that are traditionally Catholic. When they come here, they think that Catholic education you have to pay for.
Right.
Is that something you've come across?
Well, I will be upfront in terms of saying it's not something but it's interesting actually. Yeah. It's not something I thought of, and maybe there's work for us. We take it for granted, so it is something to promote and celebrate. We'll bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good answers.
That's great. Kathy, you were next.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for being here today. You will be well aware, and you've mentioned it in your briefing paper as well, of Downpatrick and the amalgamation that's happening there at the minute. And just in your contribution earlier there, it is a very long, complex process, and there has been a lot of conflict and a lot of negativity around that. But I think it's unfair to say that it's all been negative. There has been certain parties there and stakeholders who do understand the end goal and where it is going to get to. But I have to say, I've had an awful lot of concerns raised with me from parents just around the communication, issues around children with special educational needs and their classroom assistant now not knowing at this stage still whether they're going to be there in September with them, around uniforms and the logistics in terms of split between the schools and that. I just wanted to try and get maybe an understanding from yourselves what your role is there in terms of not just the area planning but the actual process and getting to the end goal, because there's a lot of concerns with parents at the minute. They feel like they're in complete limbo with it.
Thank you for that question, and I'll address it as it were, and Magellan might want to say something. What I would say is I think that in many ways that reflects some of the challenges that the independent review panel and we were talking about, in that the actual resource and impact, as it were, of delivering area planning, I think, is underestimated. And in fact, once the decision is made and say approved, I think there's an underestimate, as it were, of what it takes to move from the point of decision to implementation. And Downpatrick is one of the most significant change processes, certainly in recent years. And we've good experience of going through this in terms of Coleraine, Strabane, Lurgan, you know, where is it? Lurgan, yeah, Kilkeel, many other places. In terms of our role, it does depend on the nature of the project. In that particular project, that is a new voluntary grammar school which is being established, over which we have no authority, effectively. And certainly the decisions in terms of around the resource made available to support the establishment of that school are not within our gift. But I would say that you know, we have endeavoured as best we can to provide support to the new interim Board of Governors, to the trustees on an ongoing basis to support them. But it has been, I have to say, extremely difficult for them to access the support that I think they deserve in order to deliver a change of that nature and complexity. And I'm extremely grateful, I have to say, to that interim Board of Governors for what they've done. I think there are lessons to be learned on the part of the department and the part of others, including ourselves, in terms of how that could be done differently and done better, I have to say, moving forward. But there is also something about, at this point, providing that community with confidence. At this point, the change is happening. So there's something about rolling in behind that and giving people the confidence. And yes, you know, when change brings unsettlement, but I have every confidence that we have good leaders, good staff in that school who will support and see that community through and ultimately achieve those outcomes that all the parties envisaged. I don't know if you want to say anything.
No, I think that covers it very well. I suppose, Kathy, part of it is just an example of the challenges with area planning in terms of encouraging stakeholders to see the opportunities, not necessarily the negative, and seeing the educational argument when you're bringing forward change. But it is now, as Eve said, and we're seeing that already, you know, in terms of people now moving behind as we get to the implementation stage, and everybody recognising then that the change is for the better good for all the young people in the area.
Yeah, and do you understand that? And there's parents that are coming to me and they do understand that, you know, this is a long process, but it's the immediate fear now of their child going into September without maybe a classroom assistant, or not knowing what site they're going to be on, and transport issues, even the knock-on impact it's having on other schools and children going to those too. So is that resource that needs to come from the department directly, and that support needs to come from the department to the Board of Governors that are there?
Fundamentally, the relationship at this point is directly between that new school, as it were, and either the Education Authority or the department at this point, depending on the funding arrangements or the nature of what's being asked. But I think what it does point out is that there is a resource needed to facilitate change. In the same way, at a system level, you need to invest to save. There needs to be resource made available for that transitional period, whether it's for an interim school leader to facilitate the capital change on sites that you might now need, and I'm not quite sure the system has the capacity for that at the moment, or the resource necessarily. And it's something that, you know, in terms of area planning, you know, there's the aspirational aspect of it, and then sometimes there's the realistic aspect of what you can achieve, you know, and sometimes there has to be compromise based on what's available, as it were, to you at the time. But Downpatrick is something that you know, there is unsettlement. I get that as a parent and as a mummy, but I've every confidence if we can see through those initial weeks, months, genuinely this is a good thing for children. We've removed the need for academic selection, you know, from a huge number of pupils in that area, and given access to really sustainable provision and enhanced curriculum, all to be celebrated.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chair.
Annie?
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you. I suppose I'm very lucky that I came through the education of St Columb's. I was there in 1983, and very much a school that, and I'll be honest with you, they're taking kids who are from socially deprived areas, difficult circumstances, especially back in my day, but also when you're deemed a failure because of academic selection as well. And that's my experience, that's how we all felt going in. So they made sure they got us up to a level of 5 GCSE that then creates a pathway. And listen, I find myself sitting here today. So, and I'm very rarely parochial, by the way, very rarely. But I'm going to be
You're
parochial.
You're going to be.
I'll just leave that one hanging there.
Only once a week. I suppose the question is, I've seen the school evolve so much that the greatest asset it has is the teachers and its pupils. But newcomers is flying in the school, and the last time I met with Adrian, I think his presentation was like 70% of the children that they're teaching now have additional needs. I suppose with the fluctuation of numbers, and we've been heavily underfunded for the last 14 years by Tory austerity. However, the money was there in the morning. It's a school that's falling apart. It's a school that within in a community of nearly, I think it's just under 18,000 people under the age of 18 live in the Callan area. It is bypassed by many parents and students because of the building, and the sustainability of it is probably moving further away from us, and I have a real worry if we don't get a capital build in that school. I suppose my question is, how do we remove, if the money was there in the money, how do we remove those barriers? Because it wasn't even in the top 10 of the list of the schools in capital, and it comes down to sometimes the numbers when really sustainability in an area of that, build a school and they will come. But even though the numbers have went up recently, quite significantly, but they will face that challenge again with numbers.
I'll just say one quick, Danny, we were out at the school obviously recently, and there's huge amounts to be celebrated. That school has done a wonderful job, I have to say, and it's awful to think that 10 years ago we were looking at that school in terms of its enrolment levels were so low. There was concern about it, so it should be proud of what it's achieving, as should the pupils, I have to say. If you asked us to list out all the schools that we would want to see new builds for, the list would be out the door. Our children are being educated in an ageing, a very old, inadequate estate, I have to say. That being said, the decisions in terms of how capital, even if it were available, don't sit with us. What we do is try to inform the decision and try to advocate, certainly in the case of this school. And Madela, I know you'll want to say in terms of those criteria something more.
Yeah, no, I will. And I welcome the opportunity actually to clarify, Danny, from maybe a question that was asked previously. Ultimately, we all agree St Columns needs a new school. Mm-hmm. It needs a new school. During the last call in 2021, we actually, it was the department asked us to submit 10. We sort of thought we'd take a chance and try 12. Okay. So we actually did include St Columns in our priorities at that time. But the issue was that the department have 4 criteria for their for gateway, as they call them, for schools going on a capital programme. It wasn't the enrolment that was the challenge for St Columns at all in terms of their sustainability. It was the fact that there's a gateway at that time, which was that the actual enrolment in the school had to be within 10% of the approved enrolment within the school. So at that time, the school was sitting at 13%. And therefore, when we sent it into the department and said, based on their trajectory, we know that they're going to get there because they've almost doubled in size, the department had to come back and say, there are clear protocols here and clear gateway checks here, and the school doesn't meet them. So it wasn't that CCMS didn't prioritise that school.
Oh, I knew that.
It's just the challenge around the enrolment. That being said, I think, Danny, when we were up at the school there, part of the aspect we have to try and fit now is that even if they were to go on the capital call, they'd be at the end of a list that could take 44 years to build. So it's what can we do right now? And I think that day that we were there, we found some very useful support from the infrastructure investment team in the department in terms of certain matters that could be addressed right now for the children. So it's really important that those are progressed, but in terms of the capital aspect of things for New School, that's a real challenge. Real challenge.
Thank you.
David, you're next.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks for your response so far. Just to touch on some of the earlier part of the presentation, talking about how things have changed. I think across all sectors, I think the number of newcomer children in particular has changed too. The independent review, I think, notes that while 8% of controlled primary schools, while Catholic pupils constitute 8% of the role of controlled primary schools, Protestant pupils in maintained schools, the equivalent figures are around 1 to 2%. So that kind of mixing probably hasn't progressed, and I don't say this in an accusatory manner. It's more that they go on to ask, which I think is a relevant question, and especially as it applies to area plan and so on. What do you do in order to make the schools more welcoming to those that don't share that ethos? And also, what do you find that your ethos, and it's probably going to be particularly relevant as we go on to discuss our SE, what do you feel that the school's ethos brings to the school that is attractive to parents, and why is that so valued?
Good question, and I don't think it's one that should be dodged, as it were. I suppose what I would say is, I think it's important that we don't narrow the responsibility, as it were, for addressing this solely at the door of the structure of the school. I mean, the decisions that parents make are based on a huge range of things. The reality is that academic selection means that the grammar sector can fill their school until it is full, as it were. And then, other children, you've reflected upon that, other children then go to other schools. And so, as it were, that diminishes the pool. There is a growth in terms of the number of children who are not from a Catholic background, and particularly, and we're seeing that in the controlled sector as well, the number of children or families who identify as other, which I think does a disservice, I have to say, in this day and age, to the diversity. But unfortunately, it's the only data we have.
You're here.
So sorry.
Not just in the school system. Just thinking about where we're sitting.
Well, yeah. So that is changing. And in some ways, David, one of the things I'm really uncomfortable with is we seem to come down to this binary identification of two branches of Christianity. And I think if you went out into our schools and to the young people who are away, fair enough, but if you asked them what defined them, there would be a lot more to it. And I'm really proud of the diversity that our schools have in terms of particularly socioeconomic diversity, ethnic diversity, gender identity. All those things play into the diversity of schools. That being said, it is something that we as an organisation, and I have to say our schools, reflect upon in terms of making sure there are no unintended barriers to a child or a parent making the choice to come to our school. There should be no reason why a parent should feel that they need to walk past the door of one of our schools, and it's a message that I would want to put out there. Every child is welcome in our schools. I think if you spoke to parents who've made that choice, they would confirm that is the case, and we've great examples, in Bestbrook, of how a wide range of cultures are being celebrated. Go to Holy Rosary at the top of the Ormeau Road, that's a hugely diverse, schools. So there are things to be celebrated. Our job, in my view, we're a managing authority, but I do also see it as part of our responsibility to promote our sector and what it's done. And the reason why I think the ethos is something to be proud of, and not something to be, dismissed or disrespected, is because it is those values that have informed the way in which our teachers and our school leaders have educated our children. It is because of those values that they set, targets that are stretching, that they achieve and they aim high for every child and want them to fulfil that potential. And it's because of that ethos that we've seen the outcomes that we have. So I think ethos plays a significant part, and if I may, I think that's something that's been recognised within other sectors as well, that we all know, whether you want to call it ethos or values, if you have coherent values or ethos, your outcomes are better, and that's something. I've stolen your thunder.
You're right, no, you've done it very well.
Passionate about it.
I have great sympathy with the ethos piece as well, and in many cases on the committee, I'll be making the opposite argument around. I get frustrated sometimes with the integrated label because whilst that reflects the integration of some schools, there's many schools that don't carry the name integrated, but are integrated in many other ways. So I appreciate what you're saying. I think it's just we have traditionally looked at, and you have two main communities in Northern Ireland, and it does have an impact, I think, in terms of if you have a sector that has a Catholic ethos that people with that ethos largely choose, then it has an impact on the ability to integrate other schools of whatever sectors. That's probably what I was touching on, but I do have a lot of sympathy in terms of the importance that both yourselves but also parents will place on ethos and having a place for their child at a school that reflects their ethos.
The chair to add in, I think there's a piece of work for us to do, and possibly general society to break down a perception of who can apply to what schools. Yes. There are no criteria for a Catholic maintained school that state you have to be a Catholic to attend that. It's not in any of the published criteria for the over 400 schools. But that doesn't stop the fact that some people think, I can't apply, that's not a school for me because it says it's a Catholic maintained school. So I think there is a piece of work to do. And I've said this before as an ex-school principal who wrote a prospectus, and the opening line of that prospectus was, Saint whatever is a Catholic school, and now I reflect back on that, and it is, and very proud to be that. Mm-hmm. But if I'm not Catholic and if I'm in a community and I'm reading that, I think, oh, that's not a school for me. So that's the intended barriers piece that Eve was talking about. How do we communicate to everyone that these schools are open to and welcoming for and will provide for everyone?
And to be fair, anecdotally, I'm aware of schools that have been more successful in that, but yes.
And no, just conscious to bring everybody in here. Kate.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you. It's been so interesting and so many topics touched on. I guess the first thing you mentioned, Hurley Rosary, and I wanted to start by commending the work that your schools are doing with newcomer communities. I work with a lot of asylum seekers and refugees, and it is very difficult for them to find school places. But I feel as a sector you have been really inclusive and welcoming, and I think that others could learn from that, to be quite honest. The issues of integration, I think, actually are kind of societal, you know, the problems that are there and dispersal and all of that, but it's a piece, I guess, for tea. I wanted to ask two things. I guess the first was in relation to area planning. Majella, you had talked about changing the dial and you touched on kind of the conversation, and I just wonder what more we can be doing and what that looks like. And then the second point is, given the issues that your schools are facing and the number of problems that need to be addressed and the budget constraints, what in your view, and it's a difficult one to answer, but like what is most urgent to be dealt with? So it's not to say to prioritize, because there are so many things that do need to be, but if you were having to start with a list, what would you like to see as politicians us focusing on?
In Eve's presentation, she mentioned the principals reference group, and when we seek agenda items, the first agenda item comes across special educational needs provision. And I think that's been well articulated within the committee, and the independent review touched on it as well today. But it is the pressure that schools are feeling to make sure that they are providing appropriately for all of their pupils, particularly with the increasing complexity of need that we have seen come through early years, now into preschool, into nursery, and will make its way up through the system. So I think if you ask me what's the top number one that will come from our school feedback, it's SEN provision. Budget will also be up there. There was a time when school principals were probably dealing with 90+% of their budget going on staffing. It's probably now 120 or 130, and that's not very good maths from an ex-teacher. But the pressures on then how a principal will manage a budget, try and stay within a legislative requirement, and it's about underfunding. So I think those two in particular, and I suppose we should also touch on about recruitment. Was mentioned earlier on, recruitment, retention of staff, particularly in areas like STEM subjects, Irish medium, our leadership, middle leadership in schools. The feedback is that fewer and fewer teachers are stepping forward into those traditional coordinator roles for curriculum development. We have fewer people applying across the system for vice principal and principal appointments. We have more people leaving the system earlier. Somewhere in the last 3 years, I think 50% of the principals who retired from Catholic McDane schools retired early, long before the end. So those would be the top feedback from our schools.
I think just following on from that, I would just echo particularly again the capital aspect. If I was minister and had a priority and had a magic money tree, it would definitely be that, because I think it's really important that we recognise, Robin highlighted earlier on in terms of financial challenges, Danny, you've talked about the schools estate, how our schools are achieving within those really, really difficult circumstances that they face. That principals aren't just going in to worry about delivering of education in their school on any particular day. They're going in to find that there is a leak in the ceiling, or those are the kind of challenges that they're having to face, and the stress that is then putting on our school leaders and our staff, that's then potentially resulting in some of them choosing to move on, or others choosing to not step up. All of those things are interconnected, and there's no doubt that we really need to recognise how much pressure our workforce is under, and what they are managing to do, and how positively they are managing to do it, despite all these very, very significant challenges that they face.
I'm maybe just, if you don't mind, Chair, just take the first question you asked is what can you do as political leaders, and I'm probably going to call a spade a shovel here, but I think ultimately in terms of area planning, we need to decide if we are all bought into the same outcomes, and therefore all bought into the difficult processes that requires of us. And if we're not, then please let's not pit each other against each other, and please not let's not use it to blame, us or school leaders or the department. I think we either have to decide that we're rolling in behind it and doing that collectively, or we're not. But for us to be put in a position of open conflict is very, very difficult, I have to say, for us, and does add to the complexity and delay and, I suppose, distress, to be honest with you, that the process can cause.
Could I come back to something just very briefly around special educational needs? And it was touched again in the input from the independent review panel. Early intervention, it's not solely the responsibility of of education. We have other partners who need to be playing in, and traditionally, when that intervention has been left to schools, you could be looking at a child who is in primary 3 or primary 4 before they get that intervention, and that's not early intervention.
No.
Early intervention is at the age of 2 and 3, and Sure Start and preschool. So there is a greater need, I think, for a level of partnership between education, particularly, and health, because the quicker that intervention is there, the greater the impact for the child, but also the less impact further down the line and the less resource needed further down the line. And that comes very strongly, particularly at the minute, from our preschool and our primary, who are seeing those children and the COVID impact that is working its way through the system.
I met a preschool primary teacher who just said the level of anxiety and issues that they're facing now is, and we hear it time and time again about early intervention and about SEN, and it's really useful to keep hearing it from across the board, because it reminds us why it's an absolute priority. And I think as we approach September with the crisis in places, the media focus is on the number of children who don't have places, and that is right, but also the appropriateness of the places. There's no point in creating these places if it's not going to be good for the child. So it's something as a committee we're very passionate about. It's really useful to hear your feedback. Thank you.
Can I ask you a small question?
Yeah, that's fine.
Do you have any concerns around the setting up of SPIMS?
Yes, Danny said he asked small questions.
I'm going to be very quick to ask. 30-second answer. Simply the answer.
If you can answer that briefly, because we are short on time. I trusted Danny that it was going to be a small question. I've learned a lesson there.
So I think we are supportive, I have to say, of a more inclusive setting, and I've lost my words now. Menopause moment. Presupposition of mainstream first. Assumption of mainstream. Thank you. Of mainstream first, I think is a good thing. I think that the framework that has been set up in terms of the conditions that you would want SPIMS to be set up in is a good one. I think the challenge is making sure the resources put in to make sure those conditions are there. And I think also there. We're firmly committed to supporting that process. We've no duty in it, we've no funding in it, but we manage all the recruitment that comes out of it. We manage all the governance and leadership, support that comes out of it, capital, things like that. So we are supportive of it. Yeah. I think it's challenging at the moment, but as a concept, it's a good one. And I was out at Tullygally recently, and to see that. The benefits that it's brought, to that school, albeit not one of ours, is fantastic.
Yeah, and just very briefly, Chair, where it works well, it works very, very well, and I'm in regular contact with lots of our principals who talk about the impact not just for the children who are in the SPIMS, but for the whole school community, and the learning and the benefits there. And our colleagues in EA and the department are working very, very hard in a very pressured situation to make sure that, for example, training will be there for staff, that supports, particularly from maybe colleagues in the special school settings who have that expertise, will be shared, and that's the concern, is to make sure that when you set up a placement like that, it is, as that phrase, it is the right place at the right time with the right people in it. So getting that right is the most important bit.
I think to just maybe sort of to tie that last piece up, I think as a committee we've been really clear that we support that right place, right time, and everything else that goes with that. It is just the sense at the moment that if it was a strategically planned approach to roll out SPIMS as the appropriate way to meet children's needs, and there was good evidence that was happening, we absolutely support it. The concern is that it's been done on a crisis basis, it's been done at pace, it's been done at, you know, huge sort of level of upscale in this, you know, in really rapid time. And then the worry is that quality control in terms of ensuring needs are being met. You referenced training of staff, access to allied health professionals, all of that. You know, we don't want it to be, there's not enough spaces in special schools, so we'll do this. It needs to be planned and it needs to be strategic. And if that can be delivered, then yes, but the jury's out, I think, in terms of whether in every setting that's what's being delivered. But we absolutely understand that, you know, inclusive approach to education. I think we were all in support of that. I think the final thing I just want to say, like I noted right at the start, you opened with your proudly non-selective. In terms of the SEN scenario, is there do you have any sort of assessment in terms of whether or not the responsibility for making provision for children with special educational needs is shared across school types equitably?
Noted. So about 20% of our pupils have special educational needs. Do I think it's shared? I know, I have to say, I do know that in response to the recent call in terms of establishment of SPIMS, that there was good and proactive response from the grammar sector as well as other sectors. So I think they do play their part. Ultimately, it is about the right setting for the right child. And if I could bring it back to, I suppose, the core issue as an organisation, we do not believe that academic transfer academic selection in terms of feeding into transfer is the right thing to do by children, and you know that's a wider political debate, to be honest with you, and not one I expect to resolve today.
Not one we'll do in the next 6 minutes. No.
But in terms of, from our perspective, you know, that commitment to diversity and supporting children with additional needs, diagnosed or not diagnosed, statemented or not statemented, that's at the core of our schools, and I have to say they do that very well. So.
I think it strikes me that at primary level there's an assumption that all schools will be meeting the needs of SEN children, and I think there is sometimes a shift post primary, would be my perception that was not always the case. But conversation for another time, and I'm expressing my own views and not putting words in your mouth at all, and I want to be clear on that. Look, I thank you for your time, and that's been again another really really helpful wide ranging discussion, and again we look forward to engaging with you in future sessions. But thank you.
Thank you. And if I may just finish by saying, I know, Nick, we're hopefully working with you to give you the experience, as it were, of our schools. I'd extend that invitation to any of you, whether you've been to one of our schools or not. You know, you'd be very welcome. We'd love to show you, you know, how our schools operate and the types of things that they're achieving on the ground, and that's something we can facilitate either as collectively or individually, if you wish.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for your time. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Cheers.
Thank you. Okay, so while the witnesses just make their way out, I'll just quickly through the clerk, just in terms of actions arising from the last evidence session, if there's anything at all that you've identified that we're needing to follow up on.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the issues that were raised are issues that the committee, you know, has been addressing as priority. The one that was kind of new and related to the role that CCMS plays was that a recommendation that resource needs to be made to facilitate change, you know, the change process between decisions and implementation in the development plan process. And also then Eve highlighted that there was a bid that was made by CCMS in the public transformation project. So it'll be just interesting for the committee to follow that along and see whether that does receive funding. There was an invitation there at the end. The committee has made a commitment to visit a school in every sector, and we haven't obviously been out yet. And hopefully we can do that during the RSE inquiry. But I didn't have any particular questions.
No, I mean, I just wanted to double check I hadn't missed anything. Were there any actions arising from any of that anyone feels we need to be highlighted in particular, or are we happy to note all of that at this stage?
We can ask about resource for change.
Yep, I'm happy to do that. That's fine. Okay. So that moves us on to item 9, which is correspondence, and refer members to pages 703 to 742 of your packs, and there's a correspondence table there, and then also we had additional correspondence coming through in tabled papers as well, so I would refer members to that. I'll do the usual approach of going through any that I think need an action. members, please feel free to raise anything I haven't highlighted, otherwise we'll deal with it as per the correspondence note in your pack. So I've highlighted item 9.8, that's page 722, and that's correspondence from the Committee for Finance seeking a formal response on whether briefings have been requested or received on post-budget allocations and June monitoring bids. We have not had correspondence has now come in on that. So is there anything you need to say on that at this stage, or shall we deal with that perhaps when we get to the monitoring round correspondence?
Well, I can just say that it's positive that it has been received, that there will be budget business in the Chamber on the 1st of July. So this will feed into members' contributions to that.
Okay, that's fine. Item 9.11, page 740. It's a response from the British Board of Film Classification, providing a written submission on its key initiatives and prospective topics for a proposed meeting with the committee. Would members be content that we invite the board to an informal meeting after summer recess? Is that agreed? Yep. Great. Item 9.12, this was referenced earlier in the meeting, correspondence from an individual with a number of questions for the Independent Review of Education panel. I'd propose that we advise the individual that we can either share that correspondence with the Independent Review or provide them with the appropriate contact address for them. So if members agreed. Item 9.13, and that's on page 29 of tabled papers. It's correspondence from the department providing a briefing on the June monitoring round, and that was just raised there earlier in this item. So I would propose first of all that we do share that with the Finance Committee. I think that they seem to be interested in receiving those briefings, so we'll share that. I wanted to draw two items out in particular from that I would propose we follow up with the department on, and I'm just happy to hear any other issues that arose from that. One was just the information highlighted in relation to pay and grading. Now, they were clear they didn't want figures discussed, as that remains under discussions with the union, so we wouldn't want to prejudice any of that. But other than to say that a bid has gone in the June monitoring round to address that, I would like to propose that a couple of things that we correspond with the department to emphasise again the committee's clear understanding of the priority of this and our clear understanding of how crucial this is in terms of the wider education system, and I think it would be reasonable to request that members would be, that the committee at least through the clerk would be briefed over the summer period if matters progress on that because of its critical nature, and I would also want to ask the department to clarify, should the ask change based on the outcome of industrial negotiations, how will any shortfall that arises be made up? Because that would be a pretty difficult situation to navigate if we get a bid approved, but the ask increases based on an agreed position with the department. So are members content with that? Is there anything else in relation to pay and grading that we would want to raise, and are we content with those issues? Agreed. Okay, and the other issue that I wanted to highlight was on the aggregated schools budget. Conscious there that the following on from the review panel and what's in that correspondence, the picture is pretty bleak, and it is anticipating quite substantial increase in deficits. So I would like to propose that we do write to the department just to note the committee's concern in relation to that, and to ask for response as to how the department and the minister intends to ensure that this issue of school deficits is brought under control in the year ahead. Are we content to write along those lines? Okay. Is there anything else arising? Because that's fairly detailed, which is welcome. After we did highlight with the department, we wanted to get better briefings. They've provided with that in fairly good time. Is there anything else members want to raise? No, agreed. We'll move on. Item 9.14, page 37 of tabled papers, is correspondence from Naziut Union seeking a meeting with the committee about their findings and recommendations of its special schools survey. And I know myself and other reps were at that event earlier, I think it was last week. I would certainly be keen to bring Naziut in to speak to that. I think the issue of workforce in relation to special education and some of the challenges there is a key part of the whole transformation piece. So I think it would be appropriate to invite them. Are we agreed? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Other than that, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 703? Is that agreed? Agreed. Okay, that brings us on to item 10, forward work programme. Now this did arrive just earlier on today, so I appreciate members may not have had the chance to look at it, but it's at page 743 of your papers. I'll maybe ask the clerk to speak to it very briefly first, and there's a couple of things I just wanted to highlight, just thinking of our focus beyond the summer.
Yeah. So, Chair, this plan is really just starting in September. Our first week would be the 11th of September, in fact, because the previous week plenary will be getting ready to go, and there'll be staff training for the Secretariat, but also I understand a lot of capacity building sessions for you, and I don't think it will be effective questioning yet, but that kind of supportive resilience building material. So the 11th of September would be the first main meeting. Given that uniform is such an issue in September, I've suggested their retail NI in the informal meeting the first week back, but maybe there'll be something else more of a priority at the time.
Unless anything arises or members agree, that seems appropriate, and they were keen to speak to committee in relation to uniforms.
Yeah. And then the beginning of the RSE inquiry. So it will be difficult to prioritise between SEN placements, childcare and uniform in terms of the first thing that the department will brief on. So I'm going to ask for written briefings on those so that members can look at it first off and then select. And then your RSE inquiry will be beginning at pace, hopefully. So those are just some of the initial stakeholders coming in. Initially, the Department, Education Authority, SEA and ETI giving a report on the situation as it is now in Northern Ireland, the Human Rights Commission reporting from their perspective, and then moving into the other aspects of it, the sectoral bodies and Children's Commissioner the following week, Children's Law Centre, and then beginning to take from the other jurisdictions for that comparative approach as that moves on. And you can see that in the informal meeting, some of those suggestions have come back a couple of times. Rebecca Loader on newcomer pupils, and the history teachers have been trying to get onto the plan for a while.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's provisional, but does that look like an adequate prioritisation?
I mean, I'm happy to propose we endorse that. I would just maybe add just a couple of wee caveats to that. So I think it's just it is definitely clear from members' contributions that the 2 briefings a session does remain the priority. I think just in terms of getting through business in a timely way. I know with the RSA inquiry that may come under a bit of pressure, so I would want to propose, if we were having any more than 2 briefings, that if it is an RSA specific one, that we maybe shorten those so that they're not full hour-long briefings, because otherwise it makes getting through the business very difficult, and maybe more of a receiving information rather than necessarily long question and answer session. Are members content with that? But I would be keen to keep the briefings manageable so that we are getting through the evidence sessions effectively. We agreed.
I would hope that would be like a build stage. You would have kind of 10 minutes presentation and then 20 minutes for questions, and then have
to
another,
make that a bit shorter. I think that would work absolutely. Okay, the other things I just wanted to put out in terms of just reflecting back some of our conversations over the last sessions, in terms of things that I would like to propose that we do prioritise going forward aside from the inquiry. The first, I think, SEN remains an issue, and I think we do need a review of where we're at with placements, but I think it is definitely time that we have the end-to-end review team in, and I would be even prepared to look at that over a couple of sessions to really scrutinise that work. The feedback I get when I'm speaking with principals in particular is like, we keep hearing about it, but what is it? What's in it? What's proposed? And I think that would really to get into the detail of that. So I would like to suggest that. I do think, again, based on our conversations with the independent review panel, that budget needs to be prioritised, and I think maybe some further discussions around that prioritisation piece, and in terms of what we can't prioritise everything. So what are the department looking to actually deliver with the limited resource? If members are content with that. I also wanted to suggest, based on our informal briefing with SEA in the week, that we really haven't engaged with curriculum, and again that's a really clear recommendation coming out of the independent review panel, so I think it would be reasonable to give SEA some time to have a look at that curriculum refresh aspect of things. And then finally, I think, again, it sounds dry, but if we're talking about budget and how we actually make our stretched resources go as far as they can, I think that piece around the reform and rationalisation of the EA and what's happening with that landscape review in terms of that organisation, I think it would be time, in my view, for the committee to look at that. And obviously the new chief exec will have had time to bed in, but I think we should hear from that both departmentally and internally from the EA. is there agreement on all of that? And is there, I'm very happy at this stage this is probably a good opportunity to just, if there's anything else you would like to see, either to raise it now or if you want to through the clerk, to factor in, Karen.
I was just going to suggest, I think it might be helpful to meet with ADDNI just around the delays with ADHD assessments and the impact it's having on children who are awaiting an assessment, and also their ability to attain education in the way that they would like to, because they can't focus and they're struggling to communicate. I've met with a few young people and they told me to put it on our list. So maybe that's an engagement we could consider just after the summertime even. I think that would be great.
Absolutely happy to reach out. I think we probably all engage with ADDNI and are aware of the really real challenges in the education system with their work, so absolutely. Anything else at all? I mean, there are other things that we have highlighted in the past and I hope they're still all in the mix for and we probably do need to make sure that the PE briefing that was missed from the last week does get factored in. As well, so that they're not
ATI are going
completely.
to bring it next week.
Okay.
So they've got quite a rounded briefing. There also is that idea of some more work with the panel on a concurrent meeting with economy. So I'll speak to the economy clerk, and the idea of meeting the DOL committee. And
we have our potential engagement with health as well. Look, I'm conscious we're never going to achieve all of this. That the time is short, but we'll try and keep a focus.
I would say, and they brought it back into no objection to meeting with the DOL committee, but at the same time, if as they said themselves, if we're looking at practices across the islands, I think it's appropriate then we also look at engagement with those other stakeholders in GB as well.
Yeah, certainly.
I mean, if I can maybe sort of try and set it as a priority scale. I mean, I think engagement with our own health committee first would be a good start, and then maybe we review from there. I think
just if we're going to go down the route of sort of engagement, I think we have to.
Okay. Is there anything else anyone wants to add? Always can come through the clerk for anything else if not. No. Okay. All good. So members agreed that we can endorse the draft forward work programme. Agreed. Item 11. Any other business? No. So item 12, date, time and place of next meeting. So it'll be our last committee meeting of this term before recess, and that will be Wednesday the 26th of June, 2 p.m, room 29, Parliament Buildings. So it just leaves me to put the question that the committee does now adjourn. We agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Committee room